Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? Most houses forget, they crumble, rot, and disappear beneath dust and silence. But not this one. This one remembers. You'd never think anything of it from the outside. 143 Ashcroft Lane just looks like any old Victorian relic buried in the hills of Greybridge. Ivy smothers its siding, windows yawn open like dry mouths, and the porch sags under invisible weight. Realtors called it a fixer, upper with character. Locals called it cursed. And me, I didn't call it anything. I inherited it. The letter arrived 2 months after my grandmother's funeral. Thick paper. No return address. Just a wax seal in the shape of an eye. I didn't think much of it at first. I had no family left, or so I thought. But the letter told me otherwise. I was the last living heir of Evelyn Harrow, my great-aunt, someone I'd never heard of before. And I now owned her house, 143 Ashcroft Lane. The letter didn't include a key. Only one sentence stood out, burned into my brain since the moment I read it. You must never stay past the first whisper. I wish I'd listened. I arrived in Greybridge in late October. The town didn't welcome me. It barely noticed me. The streets were quiet, store owners spoke in hushed tones, and people averted their eyes when I asked for directions to Ashcroft Lane. One old woman, hollow-eyed and shivering though it wasn't cold, grabbed my wrist outside a bakery and whispered, "That house wants you." "It waits." I laughed it off. I drove up the winding road past the cemetery, under trees too still for the season. When I reached the gate of the house, it opened by itself. I should have left then. But curiosity has teeth. It nipped at my ankles and dragged me forward. The house greeted me with groaning wood and dust, thick air. There were no signs of life, yet everything felt arranged. A mug sat on the kitchen counter, filled halfway with something that had long since dried to black tar. Upstairs, the beds were made. A rocking chair in the nursery moved, ever so slightly, when I passed the door. No animals, no bugs, no sound, save for the occasional creak, like breath through lungs that hadn't exhaled in years. And still, I stayed. The first night, I camped in the living room. I didn't trust the bed frames upstairs. The place had no electricity, but the fireplace still worked. I built a small fire, spread out my sleeping bag, and opened one of the dusty journals I found in the drawer of an old secretary desk. It was Evelyn's handwriting. Tight, hurried, as if she was always listening for something else. It watches through the mirrors. If you hear it whisper, turn away. Never answer. Never look directly at the reflections. That's all I read before I closed it. I felt a weight on my chest, like something had stepped into the room. Not a person. Something taller and wrong. The fire cracked behind me, but the heat felt distant. I turned to look, and that's when I heard it. The first whisper. It came from the far corner, near the base of the stairs. Low. Wet. A breath more than a word, but enough to chill me to the marrow. Stay. The word wasn't in the room. It was in my head. I stood so fast I nearly tripped over the sleeping bag. The house had gone quiet again. No footsteps. No breeze. No movement. I told myself it was stress, grief, that I was tired, that old houses make noises, that brains, when pushed to the edge, will do anything to fill silence. But the silence in that house wasn't empty. It was listening. The second day was worse. I tried to leave. Packed my bag before the sun rose, didn't even bother to fold the sleeping bag. But when I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. No lock, no bolt, it just wouldn't open. I ran to the back, same thing. The windows wouldn't budge. The glass didn't break when I hit it, it rippled like water. I stopped trying after that. I sat in the kitchen, back against the counter, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it. That's when the phone rang. There was no phone the day before. But now, on the hallway table, a black rotary phone stared at me, vibrating with the ring. The cord snaked into the wall where no line should have been. It rang 3 times. I let it. On the 4th, I answered. Hello. Static. Then, beneath it, a voice, familiar, female, crying. Don't trust the mirrors. Don't trust the girl. Don't stay past. Click. The line went dead. I didn't recognize the voice. But something in my stomach dropped like a stone. A primal recognition, like a dream you've had too many times. I turned to the hallway mirror, and that's when I saw her. She stood behind me. Pale, thin, wearing a nightgown stained yellow with age. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and far too aware. Not the dull vacancy of a ghost. No, this was worse. She knew I was watching, but when I turned around, nothing. I looked back at the mirror. She was closer. My breath caught in my throat. Every hair on my arms rose. I stepped back. She didn't move, but the mirror did. The frame stretched, pulsed, as if struggling to contain her. I threw a blanket over it. The second I did, the crying started, not from the mirror, from upstairs. A child's cry, soft, fragile, so real. I should have stayed put, but my legs moved without asking. Up the staircase, each step groaning underfoot, the air thicker with every breath. The crying led me to the nursery. It stopped the moment I opened the door. The rocking chair sat still. The crib was empty. But carved into the wall, freshly dug into the plaster, were words written in jagged, panicked letters. Sei shi mor eits bnt las s. And beneath it, etched deeper than the rest, duantiladi harot. I turned and saw the mirror. Not just any mirror. This one was large, oval, framed in black wood with a crack running through its surface. She was there, smiling. Then her mouth opened, far too wide, far too wrong, and the sound that came out wasn't human. It was laughter, but not joyful. Hungry, I ran. That night, the house came alive. Footsteps padded above me, back and forth across the attic floor. The fire lit itself. The journal pages turned on their own. A music box in the guest room began playing a tune I remembered from childhood. A tune I hadn't heard since my mother died. It stopped when I looked at it. And then the lights came on. No bulbs, no power lines. But every lamp, every chandelier, lit with a soft, unnatural glow. The house was showing me itself, and it wanted something. On the 3rd night, I stopped counting time. There was no sleep. The house didn't allow it. Every time I closed my eyes, she was there. The girl from the mirror. Only now she whispered to me. Not in words. In images. Blood on the staircase. A woman screaming behind a locked door. A man burying something under the floorboards. The girl standing in the nursery. Not crying, but smiling, watching, and always the mirror. I found another journal in the basement. This one wasn't Evelyn's. It was my mother's. I didn't even remember her visiting this place. The journal was half burned, but I could still read some entries. I thought I escaped, but the dreams brought me back. She only speaks to blood. If you see yourself smiling in a mirror when you're not, Ra Yuen. I dropped the journal, and in the corner of the basement, where the concrete met dirt, I saw it. A mound, freshly disturbed soil. I grabbed a rusted spade and dug. I didn't know why. I just knew I had to. The smell hit me first, then the cloth, a nightgown, the same one the girl wore, and beneath it, bones. Tiny, fragile, curled in on themselves, clutching a broken hand mirror. I stared at it, unable to breathe. Then a hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around. No one was there. Only the sound of giggling echoing through the pipes. It's the 7th night now. I haven't slept. I can't leave. And every mirror in the house is smiling at me. She's getting stronger. I don't know what she is, but I know what she wants. She wants me to stay. She wants me to let her out. And worst of all, I'm starting to want to. Because the whispers, they're not just warnings anymore. They're promises. And I'm listening. God help me, I'm listening. The whispering started again just before dawn, threading through the cracks in the walls like steam rising from something buried. It no longer sounded like a single voice. It had grown into many, layered, shifting, speaking over one another like a crowd mumbling at the back of your brain. And though the words still didn't make full sense, their tone had changed. They weren't begging. They weren't warning. They were waiting, as if they knew something I didn't. As if they were just about done playing nice. I hadn't seen the girl since the night I dug up the bones. I told myself that was a good thing. That maybe I disturbed whatever lay dormant beneath the house enough to give it pause. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was preparation, the kind that comes right before a scream. I tried to stay away from the mirrors, but they were everywhere. Hidden behind curtains, tucked in corners, embedded in furniture I hadn't even noticed before. The worst were the ones that moved. Not all at once. Not violently. Just a soft scrape, like nails against wood, as they rotated on hinges that hadn't worked in years. One turned to face me every time I passed it, slowly, deliberately, as if tracking my steps. Around midday, the smell returned. Faint at first, metallic, sharp, but by the afternoon, it coated the back of my throat. The house had begun to sweat something foul. Yellow streaks ran down the walls, thick and sticky, trailing from the ceiling beams to the floor. I followed one back to its source, and found it leaking from a vent above the guest room, pooling slowly on the floor. When I touched it, my skin buzzed like I dipped my fingers into a live wire. I didn't sleep that night either. I didn't even try. Instead, I read Evelyn's journal, the fragments of my mother's, and a new one I found behind a loose brick in the fireplace. This one was dated 1894. The author didn't sign their name. The pages were brittle, written in ink so faded it looked like spiderwebs on the paper. But the voice was frantic. It spoke of her, of the girl, always watching, always whispering. And then came a passage that chilled me more than the bones in the basement. She came through the mirror in the attic first. The frame was a gift bought from a man with no name. Said it was made from the wood of a hanging tree. She took our son first, then the dog, then my wife. Now the walls breathe. I don't know which reflections are mine anymore. I dropped the journal when something above me scraped. Not a creak, not a groan. Something dragged across the floorboards in the attic, heavy, slow. A sound that had weight. It started at one end and made its way toward the far side, stopping directly above me. I held my breath. For a moment, nothing. Then 3 knocks measured, hollow, right above my head. I wanted to move, I didn't. Instead, I looked up. The ceiling was bleeding. Thin red lines, like cuts in the plaster, dripped onto the hardwood floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat had dried into stone. Instead, I backed out of the room and slammed the door shut, only to find another mirror waiting for me in the hallway. This one was new, tall, rectangular, its glass flawless, but the hallway around me didn't reflect in it, only darkness, and 2 pale hands pressed against the inside. Not mine. They were too small, too young, and they were pushing. I ran to the front door, tried it again, pounded and kicked, screamed for anyone to hear me. Nothing. The door didn't budge. The house didn't even echo anymore. It had swallowed the sound whole. The second I stopped screaming, I heard it again, laughter. Not loud, just close, inside my ear. I turned and saw her, at the top of the stairs, not a girl anymore. Her limbs were longer now. Wrong angles. Her head tilted too far to one side, like something inside had snapped. Her eyes were bottomless, mouth slightly open, like she was just starting to smile or was about to bite. She didn't move. I blinked. She was gone. That night, the house began to breathe louder. You don't realize how loud a place can get until the quiet turns rhythmic. The floor pulsed beneath my feet. The walls exhaled long, low groans, as if sighing through lungs that didn't need air. Lights flickered with each breath. Shadows stretched further. And from the basement came the sound of something wet being dragged across stone. I barricaded the nursery. The mirrors in there were starting to fog over, and I didn't want to know why. I nailed boards over the guest room door. I threw the fireplace journal into the flames and watched it scream as it burned. The house didn't like that. At midnight, the mirrors screamed back, every single one, simultaneously. Shattering sound, not glass. No glass broke, but my ears rang, blood trickling from my nose, as the sound tore through the walls like thunder. When it stopped, I was on the ground, curled in the hallway, teeth rattling in my skull. And then the lights went out, not just dimmed, gone, total black. And in that dark, something touched my face. Not a hand, a tongue. I bolted upright, flailing, and smacked into something warm. Breathing, I pushed, kicked, and scrambled back until I found the stair railing. I held it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Slowly, my eyes adjusted. Moonlight pooled in from the broken skylight. I was alone, until I looked up. On the ceiling above me, written in what I hoped was red paint, was a message: Mau irrs rr wudobas. Ain cis ioried I ansidi. I didn't sleep. I couldn't even close my eyes. I waited for morning, but it never came. Not really. The sun didn't rise. The sky lightened. Just a little. Enough to see that the trees outside were closer than they were yesterday. The gate had disappeared. The grass had gone gray. And the birdsong was gone, replaced by the same whispering I'd heard in the walls. But now, it came from the trees. The house wasn't just remembering. It was expanding, becoming more of what it wanted to be. Feeding off me. And I was giving it exactly what it wanted. Attention, fear, time. At noon, I went back to the basement. Don't ask why. Somewhere between exhaustion and desperation, something inside me decided I needed answers more than I needed to be safe. The mound I had dug up before was still there, but beside it something new had appeared: a door, wooden. Narrow, iron handle, no hinges. I swear it wasn't there before, but it breathed. The wood flexed ever so slightly with each beat of the house. When I touched the handle, it was warm. Slick. I felt something move on the other side. I should have run. I should have burned the house down and taken my chances. But I opened it, and I saw her. Not the girl, not the twisted thing with the smile. Her, Evelyn. She stood in a room lit by candlelight, completely untouched by decay. Her dress was clean, her face lined but calm. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me. I told you not to stay past the whisper, she said. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. You opened the mirror, didn't you? I didn't know how to answer. She sighed. She remembers you. She always did. You just forgot her. And then she lifted her hand, showed me the scar. A long, twisted mark from her wrist to elbow, shaped like a thorned vine. She gave me this. The first time I tried to leave. What is she? I whispered. Her eyes darkened. She's your twin. I blinked. What? She died in the womb. Or was supposed to. But she stayed. Not in flesh. In reflection. Every mirror holds a shadow. Some stronger than others. She grew in the glass, watching. My knees buckled. No one had ever told me I had a twin. She called you back, Evelyn said. Through blood. Through blood, she opens the way. I wanted to deny it. Say Evelyn was mad. Say this was all some twisted nightmare. But the mirrors in the room told the truth. In one of them, I saw myself as a child, standing beside someone who looked just like me, but her eyes were all wrong. Too dark, too deep, and she was grinning. Evelyn stepped forward and handed me something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it slowly. A mirror shard. It pulsed in my hand like a heartbeat. If you want to stop her, she said, voice low, you'll need to remember everything she showed you, and everything she made you forget. But how? She looked past me. She's already listening. And then the door slammed shut, and Evelyn was gone. I was back in the basement. Alone. The shard in my hand shimmered, and reflected nothing. Not even me. The whispers were louder now. They weren't asking me to stay. They were telling me. And next time, they won't ask at all. I didn't know how long I stood there in the basement, clutching the shard like it was the last real thing in the world. It was warm in my hand, almost uncomfortably so, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. But the longer I held it, the colder the room around me became, like it was feeding on something I couldn't see. The mirrors upstairs had gone quiet again. That should have comforted me. It didn't. Silence in this house was never peace, it was potential energy. And it meant she was watching. I climbed back up the basement steps slowly, careful not to let the shard slip. As I moved, it shimmered faintly, not with light, but with a strange, oily sheen. Colors shifting in ways that didn't belong to the visible world. And the deeper I stared into it, the more it began to pull. Not physically, not with force, but with memory. My thoughts started to blur, moments bleeding into one another. The house, the journals, the girl, my mother. I hadn't thought about her properly in years. Not since the accident. But now her voice kept circling the edge of my thoughts, whispering like wind under a locked door. I remembered how she used to hum the same lullaby every night, the one I'd heard come in from the music box. I remembered her telling me not to stare at mirrors too long, that they could show you more than what you bargained for. I always thought it was just one of those odd things parents said when they wanted you to behave. But what if it wasn't? What if she knew? I walked through the hall slowly, shard gripped tight, afraid to look at my reflection in anything, even the glass of a framed picture. I passed the nursery door. The boards I'd nailed up had come loose. They lay on the floor now, arranged in a spiral pattern. At the center of it, the music box played softly, its lid open, ballerina spinning slowly even though I hadn't wound it. It was the same tune from my childhood, and for a brief moment I was 5 years old again, tucked in bed, watching shadows dance across the ceiling as my mother sat beside me, humming. But the memory twisted before I could enjoy it. In it, she was crying, trying not to show it, her hand on my forehead, trembling. And just outside the bedroom, in the hallway mirror, something else was watching us. Something I'd forgotten was there. The tune warped, slowed, then stopped altogether. The ballerina froze mid-spin. The air grew thick, like syrup, and I felt the pull again, stronger now, from the shard. I looked down at it. It was no longer smooth. A small eye had formed on its surface, not drawn, not carved, ground. It blinked once, and I dropped it. The moment it hit the floor, the lights overhead burst. Every bulb in the hallway shattering in perfect unison, like someone had clapped their hands too close to brittle glass. Darkness fell again. Not full, but mean. The kind that lives between flickers, the kind you feel pressing against your skin, even when your eyes are open. I bent down to pick up the shard. It had rolled into the nursery. Of course it had. I stepped inside, breath caught in my throat, careful not to touch the spiral of boards. As I reached for the shard, something shifted in the corner of the room. I didn't look. I knew better than to look. I grabbed the shard and backed out slowly. But she followed me, not with footsteps, with presence. You can feel her before you see her. The air drops 10 degrees, your skin starts to itch, and your hearing goes flat, like you're underwater. And somewhere in that moment between senses, she steps closer. I felt her behind me in the hallway. I saw her flicker in the frame of a shattered photo, her smile wider now, less human, more design. Like she had studied what fear should look like and wore it like a mask. I moved toward the attic stairs. Something in me said that was where I needed to go. The mirror Evelyn had mentioned in her journal. The first one. The one where it all started. I didn't remember ever seeing it up there, but then again, the house didn't exactly play by the rules. It gave you what it wanted you to see. And now it wanted me upstairs. The staircase to the attic was narrower than I remembered. Dust clung to the walls like skin. Each step groaned like it was screaming in protest. At the top, I paused. The door was slightly open. Not enough to see inside, just enough to show that someone, or something, had been through recently. I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, heavier than the rest of the house, as if no oxygen had passed through here in decades. The attic was filled with forgotten things, draped furniture, broken trunks, old toys, but at the far end, Mounted to the wall was the mirror. It was massive, oval-shaped, framed in rotting wood. A long vertical crack split it down the center, but what caught my eye wasn't the glass. It was what stood in front of it. Me, but not me. The reflection didn't copy my movements. It stood still while I stepped forward. Its eyes were darker, face sharper, more angular. And when it smiled with teeth, too many of them. Then it opened its mouth, and it spoke. "You left me." The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't the girl's. It was something else entirely. Ancient. Wet. Wrong. "You left me in the dark." I raised the shard instinctively, like it could protect me, and the reflection flinched. It stepped back, face contorting into rage. "You don't get to keep the light." And then it lunged from inside the glass. The mirror rippled like water, and the thing reached through. I slashed at it with the shard, and where the edge touched the glass, it sparked. The thing screamed, not with pain, but fury, as it was pulled back in. I didn't wait. I stabbed the shard into the mirror's crack. The room shook, not metaphorically, violently. The walls screamed. A high-pitched sound like metal being bent in half. The floor heaved beneath me, and the mirror began to bleed. Thick, dark liquid poured from the crack, soaking the floorboards, and then the mirror whispered. Not from the reflection. From inside the shard. "You remember now." I yanked the shard back. The moment it came free, the mirror split apart, not shattered, opened like a door. Beyond it, not another room, not the attic, but a corridor made entirely of mirrors, stretching on forever. Endless versions of me, standing in infinite reflections, all staring back with vacant eyes. And in the center of the corridor, far down the path, stood the girl. She held a mirror of her own, and she was pointing it at me. For a moment, I saw through it. I saw a version of myself, but empty, hollow, a puppet made of skin and teeth, and I knew that was what she wanted to make me. A vessel, not to be with me, to become me. I slammed the mirror shut with the shard and stumbled back as the glass twisted and warped, slowly sealing itself with a crackling hiss. The bleeding stopped. The house went still, but not for long. Behind me, every mirror in the attic began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that built like thunder under skin. I grabbed the shard and ran, nearly tumbling down the attic steps. The hum followed me, louder, stronger, as if the house was charging for something. I made it back to the living room, just as the floorboards above exploded, dust raining down around me. The girl's voice echoed through the house, not crying, laughing, giddy, triumphant. "I found you," she sang. "You opened the way." I looked down at the shard. It had split in two. One half reflected me. The other didn't reflect anything at all. I don't know what I've done, but I know the door is open now. And she's not the only one on the other side. I didn't realize I was bleeding until I reached the foyer. A long gash ran down my forearm, not deep enough to kill me, but enough to leave a trail behind, a crimson breadcrumb path across the warped floorboards. It hadn't hurt when it happened, and that worried me more than the wound itself. Pain should mean something. It should anchor you. But the house was starting to dull things. Not just sounds or colors or time, but me, like I was being unraveled, thread by thread, memory by memory, until there'd be nothing left but a shape that looked like me, walking halls that no longer had exits. I should have left the shard in the attic. I should have smashed it. Instead, I held both pieces tight, one in each hand, one that still reflected my face, and the other as black and depthless as the girl's eyes. When I pressed them together earlier, the mirror had opened. Now they pulsed in rhythm, like two halves of a thing that was never meant to be separated. The house wasn't breathing anymore. It was waiting. I could feel it in the silence. Something poised, watching. And not just from mirrors this time. Every picture frame, every window pane, every puddle of water on the kitchen tiles, they all held eyes now. Not physical ones, but impressions. Like the girl had left fingerprints in the glass, and each one stared. I didn't want to see my reflection anymore, but I needed to know if I still had one. I crept into the dining room, found a small wall mirror above the fireplace mantel, and braced myself. I raised the reflective shard, only the half that still showed my face, and held it up. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed it. My reflection blinked out of sync, just once. A millisecond too late. But it was enough. I lowered the shard. My stomach flipped. Somewhere in the walls, something shifted. A wet shuffle, like raw meat dragged across tile. Then, faintly, the sound of teeth clicking. Not in hunger, in excitement. I backed out of the room, hands shaking. The shard's two halves were humming now. Not loud, just under the surface, like distant singing through a fog. The words weren't clear, but the tone was. Celebratory. Triumphant. Like something had been promised, and now it was being delivered. I stopped in the hallway, not by choice, but by the pull of a scent. Lavender. It hit me like a wall. My mother's favorite perfume. The same kind she wore the night she died. I followed it without thinking. The scent drifted upstairs, into the master bedroom I hadn't dared to enter yet. The door was open now. Waiting. Inside, the air was too clean, too still. As if the house had preserved this space, untouched by rot or dust. The bed was made, curtains drawn, and on the nightstand, next to a cracked photograph of a woman I barely remembered, sat a small box wrapped in red ribbon. I didn't want to open it, so of course I did. Inside was a key, old, iron, cold to the touch, and underneath it, a note, handwritten in a script I recognized immediately. My mother's. The key isn't to a door, it's to a memory. Use it only when you can no longer tell the difference between her and yourself. I dropped the note. Outside the room, a thump echoed in the hall. Then another. Then another. Like something crawling across the ceiling. Dragging limbs too long for this world. I clutched the key tight and fled the room, but as I crossed the threshold, I saw it. My reflection in the bedroom mirror. It didn't move. Didn't blink, it just smiled. The house began laughing around dusk. It started as a low vibration in the walls, almost like laughter held behind teeth. Then the pipes began to creak, rhythmically, in bursts. The floorboards swelled with each step I took, groaning under a weight that didn't match my body. And when the lights flickered on, without electricity, without explanation, I saw what they revealed. Handprints, tiny ones, dozens of them, pressed into the walls like soft clay, trailing up toward the ceiling, and across them, written in a jagged, rust-colored scrawl, were the words, Wow you mar bornagaitiasar, yo you jstnr saduiar. I stumbled back, heartbeat thrashing, and slammed into the grandfather clock in the hallway. It chimed, but not with sound, with laughter. The girl's voice echoing from inside the gears. And then, like the chiming had been a signal, every door in the house began to open. One by one, slow, dragging, exposing dark rooms I had never seen before, even though I had walked this hallway countless times. The house was bigger now, growing, feeding on memory, on fear, on the boundaries I once believed were real. I found myself in front of the basement stairs again. The shard buzzed in my hand, the black one thrumming harder than ever. The other one, the one with my reflection, was dull now, like a dying light bulb. The balance between them was shifting. I went down. The air below had changed. It was warmer, wet, smelled like copper and earth and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The door from before, the one Evelyn had vanished behind, had reappeared. Only this time, it wasn't shut, it was wide open, and beyond it was me, not a reflection. A copy, same face, same clothes, but something was wrong. The smile was too still, the eyes too calm. I knew instantly what I was looking at, a skin she'd made. My skin, waiting for her to step into. The copy held out its hand. Time to come back, it said in my voice. You were never meant to leave. I ran. Up the stairs, the walls pulsing, the laughter now everywhere, not just hers. Mine, too. I could hear it, twisted and giddy, looping over itself in broken, mocking echoes. I didn't stop until I was in the attic again. The mirror had returned, cracked, leaking, and it was whispering my name, but not gently, begging, screaming, demanding. Behind the glass, hundreds of me's stood in rows, all lifeless, mannequins of flesh, and at the center stood the girl, no longer hiding. Her limbs were longer, her mouth split open down the middle like an unzipped dress. Her eyes weren't eyes anymore, just pits of moving blackness, reflecting everything she had taken from me. And she pointed. At the shard. At the key. At me. The mirror split open, no ripple this time. Just tearing. The smell of soil and birth and something ancient rushed out, and the girl began to walk forward. I had one choice. One desperate move. I held up the key. Pressed it against the reflection shard. It sank in. Like metal through water. And with a snap, something inside me opened. I remembered everything. The twin that never made it. The one they said was gone. My mother's screams in the hospital. The night she sat beside me, weeping, whispering, "I'm so sorry." I didn't know she stayed behind. The girl wasn't just a ghost. She was an echo. A fragment of a soul caught between mirrors, growing stronger every time I forgot she existed. And now I had called her home. The attic pulsed. The mirror howled. And as the two shards merged, the house screamed. A long, distorted wail that came from the walls, the floor, the sky itself. And then everything stopped. Just stopped. Silence fell like a guillotine. The mirror was gone. So was the attic. I stood in a blank room. No windows, no doors. Only the sound of my breath, and a mirror hovering in the air, reflecting nothing. Then the laughter returned, from behind me, and a whisper, "You let her in." Now I don't know if I'm the one holding the shard, or if I'm inside it. It took me a long time to accept that the room wasn't a dream. It didn't fade, didn't flicker, didn't change when I blinked or looked away. It stayed blank. Sterile, no corners, no seams, the kind of emptiness that feels engineered, like something, had built it as a waiting room for minds on the edge. No smell, no heat, no movement, just a dull static in the air, like the buzz of an old television left on a dead channel. And the mirror, still hovering in front of me, floating without strings or logic, offered only a blank pane where my reflection used to be. The girl was gone, or at least I thought she was, until I turned around and saw her shadow, not her body, just the outline, shifting on the wall like light cast through moving water. No shape, no face, just the suggestion of a girl, arms slightly outstretched, head cocked in that same unnatural tilt I'd come to dread. And the whisper returned, like breath inside my skull. "This is where she lives now." I didn't speak, didn't move, because something told me this place wasn't bound by the same rules. In the house, I could still run, hide, deceive myself with doors and mirrors and floors. But here I had been peeled. Every memory, every lie, every defense I thought I had, stripped bare. It wasn't just physical, it was structural. I could feel the girl pressing against my sense of self, wearing it like a coat she wasn't sure fit her anymore. And then, the whisper deepened. Not hers this time, mine, from the mirror. I turned back to face it, and there I was. But not entirely. The face was off, eyes wider, smile flatter, skin too tight, like it had been stretched over bones not meant to hold it. And yet, it was me, or it was going to be. The voice from the mirror spoke again, not aloud, but in perfect mimicry of the thoughts I wasn't having. Words I hadn't thought yet. "She doesn't want your body. She wants your permission." I felt the floor soften under my feet. No, not the floor. My awareness of having feet. The room pulsed, and suddenly memories I hadn't thought about in years started rushing back. Too fast, too sharp. My 5th birthday. The smell of burnt toast. My mother's hand on my forehead. A red swing set. A dark closet. A whisper. A hand on my ankle. Her hand. Every memory I owned was being cross-checked. Validated. Sifted through. She wasn't just haunting me. She was editing me. And when the mirror smiled, it was with a new understanding. If I take the parts you don't remember, you'll forget you ever said no. That's when I started screaming. No sound came out, just pressure, enough to crack the silence like glass. The mirror splintered slightly, a fine line running down its center. The floating room flickered. For one breathless second, I saw the house again, the real one. My body, slumped in the corner of the living room, eyes open but empty. The shards in my hand now fused into one long, jagged sliver of obsidian, and standing over my body, reaching down slowly, was her. The girl in full. She had eyes now. Hundreds of them, swirling across her face like constellations, and each one blinked with memories that weren't hers. Mine. She had already begun copying me. Not just skin, but thought, habit, choice. And then the room swallowed me again, back into the blank, back into the thin place. I dropped to my knees. The whispering didn't stop. Now it came from inside me. Different voices. Not just the girls. Versions of me, whispering different timelines. One where I never entered the house. One where I stayed asleep in the living room and never found the mirror. One where I was born first and she never followed. A chorus of could, have beens, each more desperate than the last. I covered my ears, but the thoughts weren't coming from outside. They were leaking in through cracks in my sense of self. The mirror shimmered again. This time, it showed the house, but not as I remembered it, not broken, not bleeding, alive, pulsing, organic, its wood replaced by flesh, its walls made of muscle and sinew, windows weeping, chandeliers like exposed nerves, and in its center, rooted like a heart, was the nursery, beating, glowing, and growing larger. She had done it. She wasn't haunting the house anymore. She was the house. And every second I stayed here, in this formless blank between thought and reflection, she took another piece of me. The longer I waited, the easier it would be for her to overwrite me. I clenched my fists. The key. I still had the key. Or maybe not. I couldn't feel it. But I remembered it. And if memory was all that mattered here, maybe that was enough. I focused. Pictured the key. The cold metal. The slight bend in the teeth. The iron weight. My mother's handwriting on the note. Use it only when you can no longer tell the difference between her and yourself. I pressed the memory into the air, the way you push into water, and the key appeared, floating, glowing faintly, made of thought. I grabbed it. The mirror reacted instantly, cracked fully, lines spreading like lightning across its surface. The reflection inside distorted, twisting into a shrieking void of limbs and teeth. The girl's voice rose, high and furious. Not a scream, a denial. She wasn't ready. Not yet. I had caught her mid-possession, half of her in my body, the other half still trapped in this false world she had built. I raised the key and drove it into the center of the mirror. Everything shattered. When I woke up, I was back in the house. But different. It was raining outside. That wasn't right. There hadn't been weather in weeks. Not real weather. Not since the house had started warping. I was in the living room, lying on the floor. The fire had gone out. The walls were still, quiet, too quiet. The shard was gone. The mirrors were covered, every single one. Sheets, paint, scratches, every reflective surface had been sabotaged, and written on the floor in front of me, carved deep into the wood, were the words Oing Ofuiou I am Basike, Amr Hih Owen. I didn't move, didn't speak. I needed to be sure. I walked to the hallway mirror, the one that had first turned when I passed it. Covered in an old blanket, I reached for the corner, hesitated, then pulled it down. My face stared back, no smile, no delay, no teeth. But I didn't trust it, because deep in the reflection, in the part of the glass where the shadows stretch longer than they should, something shifted. Not a girl. Not yet. Just the impression of her, like she was crouched, waiting, learning, getting better at pretending. I touched the glass and felt warmth. Not mine, hers. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't done, and neither was she. Somewhere behind the mirrors, behind my memories, behind the thin place where reflections grow teeth, she's still whispering, still waiting. And this time, She doesn't need to open a door. She just needs me to forget who I am. Just once. The next morning wasn't a morning at all. The sun didn't rise so much as glow faintly, like a dying ember beneath thick, gray clouds. No birds, no sound of wind or rain, just a stale, waiting stillness. The kind that sits on your chest before something goes wrong. I wandered through the house like a trespasser in my own skin, unsure whether I was awake or dreaming someone else's memory. The air was cold, but not in a natural way. It felt hollow, like temperature was just a memory the house replayed to keep me comfortable. I still hadn't touched another mirror, but I could feel them, even under the sheets and behind the boarded frames, like eyes behind bandages, wide open in the dark. I needed to leave. That thought kept circling my mind with a rhythm too perfect to be mine. I needed to leave, like it had been planted, suggested, rehearsed. And that's when it hit me. What if that voice in my head wasn't mine anymore? What if, in trying to reject her, I'd given her the only thing she wanted? A copy. The mirror hadn't just reflected me. It had taken me, or a part of me, and left something behind. Maybe that was the plan all along. Not possession, not haunting. Replication. A slow, surgical exchange. Memory for memory. Choice for choice. Thought for thought. Until the lines blurred so badly, I wouldn't know if the next thing I said was truly mine, or something she wanted me to say. I had to test myself, so I began writing. I found a pencil in one of the old journals, mostly empty save for a few smudged pages of Evelyn's handwriting. I wrote down my name, my birth date, my childhood address. Then, I flipped the page and did it again from memory. It didn't match. The name was right, but the birth date, one digit off. The address, wrong city, and worse, I didn't remember writing the first version. I stared at the handwriting, my own, and couldn't recall forming the letters. As if someone else had guided my hand while I was still me. That's when I knew. I wasn't just forgetting. I was being rewritten. The rules of this house weren't physical. They were cognitive, mental. She didn't need to chase me. She just needed to outlast me. Memory was the real battleground. And every second I spent inside her walls, every moment I saw a corner that wasn't there the day before, every dream that bled into my waking thoughts, it gave her more to work with. So I wrote a list, a short one. 1. My name is Dado. 2. I came here alone. 3. I do not trust the mirrors. 4. I am still in control. 5. If I doubt anything, I must leave immediately. I repeated the list aloud, over and over, until the words felt solid. Then I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. The moment I did, the house shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly. Like a boat rocking on still water. But it was enough to tell me she knew. That I was fighting back, and she didn't like it. The front door was still sealed. Of course it was. The windows still shimmered when I looked too long, like heat mirages over black water. I couldn't go through them. I'd tried that before. The only place I hadn't truly explored yet, at least not willingly, was the cellar. Not the basement, the cellar. The door I'd seen in the corner once, weeks ago, but always ignored. It had no frame, no handle. Just a flat slab of warped wood set into the wall beneath the staircase, like it had been swallowed halfway by the house itself. It hadn't opened. Not then. Now it was wide open. Darkness stared back. Thick, heavy, breathing. It didn't invite me, it expected me. I stood at the edge for what felt like hours. No sound. No draft. Just a drop in temperature that made my teeth ache. I lit a candle from the mantel and stepped through. The air changed immediately. Not in temperature, but in pressure. Like diving into deep water. Sound moved slower. Breath took more effort. And there were no walls. Just a long, narrow corridor lined with broken furniture, discarded toys, and shattered mirrors that didn't reflect anything at all. The deeper I walked, the more the hallway curved. Gently at first, then sharper, until I was sure I was no longer walking forward, but downward. Spiraling, circling something at the center of the house. Or beneath it. I passed more markings. Scratches in the stone, some shallow, some dug in with panic. At one point I saw a full sentence etched into the wall. If you forget why you came, she wins. Below it, a trail of fingernail marks led to a shattered mirror the size of a coffin. No reflection. Just a faint pulsing glow behind the glass, like a heart beating far, far away. I didn't stop. I kept walking. And finally, the corridor opened into a room, or what used to be one. The ceiling had collapsed, revealing rotting beams that swayed gently without wind. The floor was soaked, wet with something thicker than water. At the center stood a cradle, old, wooden, covered in vines that moved like fingers, and next to it, her. Not the girl I had seen before, but myself, standing still, silent, pale as wax, a perfect copy. The only difference, she was smiling, and her eyes were closed. I took a step forward, candle shaking in my hand. The copy didn't move, but her mouth opened, and she whispered, "I am the one who remembers now." My knees nearly buckled. She had taken it. Some part of me I didn't even know was missing, but I could feel it now, like a phantom limb, an echo of who I was. The real me wasn't gone, just muted, and in that silence she had become the louder voice. I took the candle and threw it at the copy. It passed through her, hit the cradle. The vines caught fire instantly, and the screaming began. Not hers, mine, from the shadows, from the walls, from the mirrors on the ceiling that now showed every version of me I'd left behind. I ran, back up the spiral, up and up and up. The walls closed behind me. The corridor shrank. The cellar door slammed shut the second I stepped out, and when I turned, the list in my pocket was gone. I checked everywhere. Nothing. No scrap of paper, no pencil. Not even the journal I'd written in. She'd taken it. She didn't need to kill me. She just needed me to forget the rules. And now? Now I didn't remember if I ever had any. By the time I realized the house had changed again, it was too late to remember what it used to be. The layout, the stairs, the halls, the rooms, all different. Not in a dreamlike, shifting walls way, but in a subtle, surgical manner. The door to the kitchen no longer led to the kitchen. The guest bedroom now had 2 windows, even though it faced the inner corridor, and the grandfather clock had moved. I didn't move it. I would have remembered that. At least, I think I would have. But the longer I stayed in this place, the more slippery the days became. Like trying to grip oil with your bare hands. Time in the house didn't pass, it curled, looped in on itself until nothing was forward or backward anymore. I slept once, or maybe twice, on a couch I didn't recognize. When I woke, there was a new door across the room. It was slightly open. Enough to see there was light on the other side. Not the house's light. Daylight. Actual, clear, golden sunlight spilling onto the dusty floorboards. I didn't trust it. Nothing here gave without taking. But I stood. I stepped toward the door, heart thudding with something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. The floor was soft underfoot. Not carpeted, soft, like stepping across soil or something that had learned to mimic it. I kept moving, eyes locked on the gap in the door, that gentle light coaxing me closer. I reached for the knob and pushed the door wide, and found nothing. Just another room, same faded wallpaper, same hardwood floors. Only one difference: the room had 7 doors, each one identical. No signs, no labels, no windows. Just tall, narrow doors spaced evenly around the room like numbers on a clock. Behind me, the door I'd entered through closed without a sound. I tried to open it. Locked, of course. My skin crawled. The air here was too still again. No scent, no dust. As if the room hadn't existed until I walked into it. I stared at the doors. 7 choices. Or maybe 7 traps. It was a game. I knew that now. The house played games, with time, with logic, with memory. She liked watching me choose. There were no clues. Nothing obvious. No temperature changes, no creaks, no whispers. Just 7 silent doors and me, paralyzed by choice. I closed my eyes, waited, listened. Faintly, behind the 3rd door to my left I heard breathing. Not hers. Mine. It matched the rise and fall of my chest, like an echo trapped behind wood. A mirror without glass. I chose that one. The door opened without resistance. The room beyond it was smaller, circular, candlelit, and on the floor, scrawled in chalk, was a massive symbol. Impossible geometry drawn in perfect arcs and jagged lines. In the center stood a mirror, tall and cracked, pulsing faintly with color, not red, not black, but violet, like bruised skin. I stepped inside. The door closed. I didn't try to reopen it. There was no point. I already knew this was a place I was meant to find. The mirror was humming. Low, deep, not musical, mechanical. A dull vibration that throbbed in my chest. I approached carefully, half expecting the girl to leap from the glass again, arms wide, teeth flashing. That mask, like face splitting open. But she didn't. In fact, she wasn't there at all. Instead, the mirror showed something else entirely. A version of the house, but upside down. Not like an image rotated 180 degrees, but reversed like the house had been gutted and rebuilt inside out. The floors were ceilings. Doors opened sideways. And from every corner, shadows leaked like spilled ink. But there were people in the image, versions of me, walking those twisted halls. Some moved in circles, over and over. Some screamed and clawed at invisible walls. And one, just one, stood perfectly still, staring at me. No expression, no movement, just watching. Then he lifted his hand and pointed to the floor of his world. I looked down. At the chalk circle beneath my feet. The lines were changing, curling in on themselves, rearranging, and I wasn't standing inside the circle anymore. I was part of it, a symbol, a shape, my body marking the final stroke. I turned to run. Too late. The mirror shattered, not into shards, but into holes. Each piece no longer reflected light, but sucked it in. The air pulled toward it, my breath stolen from my lungs as the room tilted. Gravity failed. I was falling sideways. And then, I was standing again, somewhere else, the house, but not the house. Similar, familiar, but everything just slightly wrong, like a drawing done from memory. The walls were too narrow, the lights too dim. The wallpaper bled softly at the edges. And every mirror was watching me, not reflecting, watching. Eyes pressed behind glass, her eyes, not blinking, not moving, just waiting, and worse, they looked tired, as if she wasn't hunting anymore. Because she didn't need to. Because I'd brought myself to her. The floor creaked behind me. I turned. Another version of myself stood in the hallway. This one was smiling, a slow, knowing grin stretched just a little too wide, and in his hand, my list, the one I wrote to remember, the one I lost. He raised it. Read it aloud, voice matching mine perfectly. Number 4, I am still in control. Then he crumpled the paper. A mirror beside him rippled, and the girl stepped out. Not crawling, not lunging, just walking, like she belonged here. Because she did, and the me that wasn't me. Stepped aside for her. Let her through, let her in. She looked at me with those endless eyes and whispered one word. Finally, and I remembered. Not who I was, but who I used to be. Before I ever looked into that first mirror. It's strange what you remember when your identity begins to split. Not the big things, names, dates, places, but the small, nearly useless details. The hum of an old refrigerator in the middle of the night. The way your breath fogs a mirror in winter. A hallway light that always flickers when no one's looking. These were the fragments still floating in my mind like debris in a sinking room. Everything else, the who, the why, the how, was smudged. Either stolen or slipping away. The girl hadn't needed to break me. All she had to do was leave enough behind to trick me into thinking I was still whole. I stood in the hallway of the other house, the place that felt like home but wasn't. The version built for reflection. The floors creaked under my weight, but there was no echo. Nothing bounced back, not sound, not light, not even thought. The girl had passed by without touching me, and still, her absence throbbed like a bruise on the air. I couldn't tell if I had followed her, or if this was all some reflection of her, of what she wanted me to see. what she wanted me to become. There were photographs on the wall now. I didn't remember hanging them. Each one was of me, or a version of me. In some, I looked older. In others, younger. Some were mid-motion, blurred and twitching, like I'd been caught moving when I shouldn't have. But in every photo, I wasn't alone. She was there. The girl. Not center frame. Not staring, but present. Peeking from behind doorways, hiding under furniture, her silhouette barely visible behind drawn curtains. The longer I looked, the clearer she became, like the house had finally stopped hiding her. And for the first time since stepping foot in this place, I wondered if I had ever truly been alone. I tore one of the photos off the wall. It crumpled in my hand like damp paper. Beneath it, scratched directly into the wallpaper, were words, "The first time you saw her, you were 3. I didn't remember that. Not clearly, but something clicked in my chest, like a door creaking open a few inches. I remembered a feeling. Not a moment, just a feeling. Cold. Something breathing behind my closet door. My mother brushing it off, telling me it was just the shadows. But I knew even then it wasn't. She was there, always watching, waiting for me to grow big enough for her to wear, and now I was grown, perfectly sized. I stumbled into the living room, this one mirrorless, as if she didn't need them anymore. There was something on the floor, laid out neatly, like items in a shrine. I approached slowly, heart slamming against my ribs with every step. There were objects, familiar, personal. A red crayon with my bite marks on the wrapper, a sock I lost in kindergarten, my childhood teddy bear, one eye missing, stitched up by a hand I didn't remember. A photo of me sleeping, dated 2 days ago, and in the center, a single molar. Blood dried around the root. I reached up and touched my teeth. One was missing. I hadn't noticed. I wanted to scream, but something in the air told me screaming would only make her stronger. So I turned away, moved fast, toward the back of the house where the hallway should have been. Only this time, there was a new room, one that hadn't existed before. No door, just an archway, carved into the walls like the house had grown it overnight. I passed through, and immediately knew I shouldn't have. The temperature dropped, not cold like weather, but the kind of cold that reaches into your blood. The room beyond was wide, circular, like a theater, but instead of seats, there were mirrors, lining the walls, all shapes and sizes. None of them showed me, they all showed her. Different versions, different phases. A child, a teenager, a woman, sometimes with my face, sometimes with one she had crafted herself. Part mouth, part shadow. Each mirror pulsed when I walked past it, as if sensing me, welcoming me, inviting me. In the center of the room stood an empty chair. I didn't need to be told what it was for. I sat. The mirrors began to move. Not physically, but the reflections inside them shifted. Suddenly I was watching scenes play out, not memories, edits, moments from my life, but changed, slightly off. In one, my mother sang a lullaby I'd never heard before, in a voice that wasn't hers. In another, I stood at my childhood birthday party, surrounded by people I didn't know, wearing paper masks with her smile drawn crudely across them. One reflection showed me holding hands with someone, a girl my age, identical to me, walking into the woods, disappearing between the trees. And then only one of us walked back out. Each mirror whispered a new rule. You saw her first. She waited for you to forget. You left the door open. You are the reason she exists. The last mirror went black, then white, then showed me again. Now, sitting, staring, but not alone. Her hands on my shoulders, her face pressed close to the side of mine. I turned around. No one. But the pressure was still there. The chair beneath me creaked. I stood, too fast. The mirrors screamed. A shrill, warbling sound, like glass boiling. All at once, the reflections cracked, not shattered, split. Lines raced through each one like spiderwebs and fast forward. And behind those cracks I saw eyes. Dozens. Hundreds. All blinking. All focused on me. I ran. Out of the room, down a hallway that hadn't been there before. I didn't care where it went. Anywhere but here. The house twisted again. The floor stretched. The walls tightened. My breath caught in my throat like fish-hooked wire. Then I fell, hard, onto tile. The bathroom. The only room I'd avoided since day one. Because I knew what was in here. The first mirror. The one where I saw her smile back. It was uncovered. And she was already there. Waiting. Her hands pressed gently to the glass. Mouth open. Eyes wet. Not angry. Begging. She mouthed one word, "Let me stay." And for a terrifying second, I wanted to. Not to leave. Not to run. But to trade places. To be the thing inside the mirror. And let her walk free. Because she had waited so long. Because she had watched so much. Because I was tired. And she was ready. I reached for the glass, fingertips an inch away. And then, from my pocket, a sound. Crumpling paper. The list. It was back. Smudged. Torn. Unreadable, except one line, the last one. A new one. Not in my handwriting. Don't pity her. My hand stopped. The girl inside the mirror blinked. Once. Twice. Then smiled wider. A different smile now. Hungry. Triumphant. Because I had almost done it. And she knew I'd try again. Because the longer I stayed, the more I forgot what side of the glass I was really on. After that night, the house changed its strategy. No more shrieking mirrors. No more bleeding walls or sudden screams in the hallway. It stopped trying to scare me. And that terrified me even more. It meant she no longer needed fear to weaken me. She'd studied me, measured me, known the exact amount of dread I could carry before I snapped. And now she didn't have to break me, because I'd started cracking myself. The house became pleasant. Not warm, exactly, but familiar. The kind of familiar that sinks into your bones and whispers that maybe, just maybe, you never lived anywhere else. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and burnt toast. The floorboards creaked in the right places, and when I passed by windows, I could almost convince myself the world outside was real. There were trees, a pale sky, the outline of a distant hill I thought I remembered from childhood, but none of it moved. Not the leaves, not the clouds, not the light. It was a photograph, one I hadn't taken, but one that had been stitched together from my memories. The house had stopped chasing me because it wanted me to stay, and I almost did. The moments crept in like fog, soft and slow. A warm mug on the counter, steam rising from black coffee I never made. The sound of a piano playing from somewhere upstairs, though I had never learned to play. A hallway photo that showed a version of me I barely recognized. Smiling. Arms slung around someone whose face was just slightly blurred. Not enough to notice right away. Just enough to keep me looking. It felt like healing. Like I'd been through the fire and finally found peace. But it wasn't peace. It was sedation. She didn't need to scare me anymore because she had created a place where I would willingly lower my guard. Where I'd choose comfort over truth. Stillness over escape. And the more I breathed it in, the more I could feel the weight of my body slipping. My thoughts thinning at the edges. That's when I found the cracks. Not in the walls. In reality, it started with a spoon. Simple, silver. I picked it up from the sink and caught my reflection in the curve. But it wasn't me. Not quite. The version of me in the spoon looked confused. Panicked. Breathing heavy. Like he'd just seen something he couldn't handle. He mouthed 2 words. "Wake up." I dropped the spoon. It clattered to the ground, but the sound was delayed. By half a second. Just enough to notice. Just enough to prove. This wasn't real. None of it. She had built a world for me. Not a prison. A cocoon. One I might have curled into forever if I hadn't looked at that damned spoon. I started testing everything. Opening doors I hadn't opened. Reading the notes I'd written in the journals. Some were blank. Others were full of handwriting that almost looked like mine. But not quite. The most disturbing entry. It's easier when you believe it was your idea to stay. Underneath it, drawn in a child's shaky hand, was a single eye. The same eye from the wax seal on the inheritance letter. The same eye that had followed me through every mirror, every crack, every dream. She hadn't just been waiting. She'd been studying. Not to imitate me, to improve on me, to build a better version. I ran to the bedroom and tore the sheets off the mirror on the wall. No reflection. Not mine. Not anyone's. Just static. Black and white flickers, like an old TV channel not tuned right. And then, a face. Hers, but not screaming, not smiling. Neutral. Patient. She mouthed the same thing again. Let me stay, only this time it wasn't a plea. It was a reminder, because the truth was, she already had. The longer I'd lived in this fabricated comfort, the more pieces I'd given up. Not out of fear, out of relief. I had stopped questioning, stopped resisting. I turned away, trembling. The house pulsed again, softly, pleased. I walked back into the hallway. The photos on the wall were all new, different. Every one of them now showed her, living my life, smiling at parties I never went to, holding hands with people I never met, sleeping in my bed, wearing my clothes, and in each photo, I was in the background, just a blur, fading, erased. I ran to the bathroom, threw open the cabinet. Inside, I found another list, not handwritten, typed, clean, cold. And it wasn't from me. 1. You came willingly. 2. You said yes. 3. You left the door open. 4. You built the mirrors. 5. You aren't the first. I stared at the last line for a long time. Not the first. I thought of Evelyn, of the journals, of the countless me's in the mirror room, pacing, screaming, waiting to be replaced. This was a pattern, a design, a system. The house didn't just trap people. It copied them, rewrote them, released them back into the world. While the originals rotted inside a house no one remembered. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was a draft, a rough sketch she could redraw until it looked perfect, until it felt real. I leaned over the sink. My breath fogged the glass. Slowly, my reflection returned, and it smiled without me. The door behind me creaked open. She stepped in, not screaming, not rushing, just standing. Me. Perfectly me. And she said, in my voice, with my inflection, like she had practiced it 1,000 times, "You've been resting long enough. Let me take it from here." And the worst part, for one flickering moment, I almost let her. I don't remember lunging at her. I remember deciding to, but not the motion itself, only the aftermath. My shoulder slammed into hers, hard enough to knock us both against the tiled wall. We slid to the floor in a tangled heap of limbs and breath and fury. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just grinned, that soft, terrible grin that stretched too wide, like it had been stitched in after the fact. I scrambled away, heart pounding, breath ragged, staring at the copy of me still seated on the floor like nothing had happened. And then she spoke again, calmly, softly, as if it were a conversation we'd had 100 times before. "This is part of it, too. You always fight first." The mirror beside her shimmered, not cracked, not rippling, just vibrating, like the surface of a drum pulled tight over something breathing beneath it. I took a step back. She didn't follow. She just looked at me like a teacher watching a student finally understand the lesson halfway through the test. The worst part, she was right. I had done this before. Not here, not exactly, but something like it. A faint echo stirred in the back of my mind, dreams I couldn't place. A view that hung too long. The recurring nightmare of opening a door to find myself already inside. This wasn't my first trial. It wasn't even my first fall, and the house knew that. It had counted on it. The tiled floor beneath me was warm now, sticky. I looked down and saw blood, not fresh, not mine. Stained into the grout, long since dried and scrubbed over again and again. How many versions of me had made it this far? How many had stood here, shaking, confused, convinced that this time they were real? My copy stood. No twitching, no tremor, just smooth, deliberate movement. She was wearing my face better than I ever had. Composed, balanced, at ease in a house designed to fracture. I realized then she didn't just want to be me. She believed she already was. She reached out a hand. Not as a threat, not to pull me through a mirror, but in offering, as if to say, "Come on, give in, you're tired. I've got this." And I was tired. So damn tired. I'd been running, unraveling, tearing through memory and architecture and faces that almost belonged to me. But something flared up in that moment, a flicker of heat in my lungs. Anger, shame, or maybe just something rawer, something not touched by her yet. I turned and ran, not toward her, not away from her, just through the house, door to door, hallway to hallway. The rooms rearranged themselves like lungs pulling breath. But I didn't stop. I let instinct guide me. Let what was left of me steer my body through the maze. I passed through the kitchen, now pristine and full of warm light. I ignored the soft voice calling dinners ready from a room I'd never lived in. I sprinted past a staircase that stretched too far up and not far enough down. Then I saw it, the nursery door, just like the one I'd seen in the memory mirrors, carved with old symbols, closed tight. I didn't slow down. I slammed into it with my full weight. The door burst open and I tumbled in. And there it was. The real mirror. The one I'd felt pulsing behind everything. Not just a reflective surface, but a gateway. Tall, wide, no frame. It floated an inch above the ground, humming like a low drumbeat. The room around it was wrong. The light came from nowhere. The corners stretched too far. Time wobbled. Inside the mirror was me. But not like her. Not clean. Not smooth. Broken. My reflection had missing pieces. Parts of my face pixelated and burned, parts of my body flickering like static. I looked corrupted, glitched, and it hit me I wasn't the original anymore. Or maybe I never was. What if I was the mirror born? What if I'd already been replaced? And the girl, the imposter, was trying to tell me that, trying to complete the switch, not begin it. I fell to my knees. It was too much. I didn't know who I was. Didn't know if I was a memory of a person, a puppet wearing someone else's skin, or a soul stitched together from scraps. All I knew was this one of us had to go. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not hurried, not sneaking, just steady. She entered the nursery, calm as ever, stood behind me, placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, voice gentle. "I'm here to finish you." I turned. Her face flickered. Now it was mine. Now it was my mother's. Now it was hers. Now it was no one's. A swirl of faces I'd known and forgotten and invented. I didn't recoil. I didn't speak. I just looked down at the floor, and there it was. The key. The old iron one my mother left me in that wrapped box, back when I still thought I understood this world. I reached for it, but her hand got there first. We froze, both grasping the key, and for the first time, our fingers met. Her skin was cold, not deathly, not ghostly, just wrong, like something wearing the idea of a body. We stared at each other, locked. No more games, no more chases, just one question between us, unspoken but thundering in the room: which one of us is real? The mirror behind us trembled. The world tilted. A low roar filled the space, like all the mirrors in the house grinding against their frames. I leaned in, whispered something I didn't expect to say. "I don't care," and I twisted the key. Not in her hand, not in mine, but into the air. Right where our fingers met, the mirror shattered, not into glass, into light. White, blinding, pure, and the house screamed. Not her, not me, the house. Walls buckled, the floor split. Memories collapsed like dominoes inside my skull. I fell backward into the cradle of the blast, eyes burning, heart thudding, unsure whether I was dying or being born again. The last thing I saw, her face, still wearing mine, mouth open, silent, not afraid, not angry, just surprised. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, the world felt thin, not just quiet, fragile. Like a soap bubble holding the shape of something much heavier than it should. I lay still, blinking slowly, testing the weight of my own body. The air tasted faintly like ozone, sharp and charged, as if lightning had passed through just seconds before. My fingers flexed. My breath came shallow. But something was off. I didn't remember closing my eyes. didn't remember blacking out, and yet I was here, on a floor I didn't recognize, in a room that wasn't the nursery, or the hallway, or any space I'd been before. It was small, windowless, wrapped in a fog that seemed to hang in place without movement. Walls too smooth, corners too round. Like the room had been carved out of the world as an afterthought. A room between breaths. That's the only way I can describe it. Nothing happened in here. Time didn't pass. Air didn't move. It wasn't silence, it was pause. A waiting place, holding its breath before something worse began. I sat up, slowly. Everything in my body ached, but not from pain, from displacement. Like I'd been poured back into the shape of myself after being wrung out and forgotten. Then I saw it, carved into the wall directly across from me. One word.
Kios!
Just that. No instructions, no explanation, but I knew what it meant. Somewhere in the house, or beyond it, she was still out there. Maybe trapped. Maybe watching. Maybe walking free. And now I had to decide what to do with what was left of me. But how do you choose when you no longer trust your own choices? I stood and immediately noticed that the floor beneath my feet wasn't solid. It looked like wood, but it rippled faintly under pressure, like skin stretched too thin. Every step left a small dent that healed itself after a few seconds. Across the room, a door appeared. I swear it hadn't been there a moment before, but there it was now, plain, unmarked, standing in a frame that flickered at the edges like bad reception. A heartbeat thrummed just behind it, not metaphorically, literally. I could hear it. Slow, rhythmic, almost human. I reached for the handle. It turned before I touched it. The door opened inward with a low groan, and on the other side was me. Not the twisted, smirking version I'd seen in the mirrors. Not the perfect copy with the calm voice and gentle hand. Just me, ragged, pale, exhausted, staring at me like I was the intruder. His eyes were red, rimmed, as if he'd been crying for hours. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I took a step forward. He mirrored me. Another step. He did the same. We stood inches apart now, two versions, both breathing shallow, both watching closely for any sign of wrongness in the other. I whispered, "Are you me?" He nodded, but slowly, uncertain, and then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the list, my list, the real one, crumpled, bloody, half burned at the corners. I reached into mine. Nothing. He saw the confusion in my face and smiled, softly, sadly. "Only one of us leaves," he said. I froze. The air in the room pulled tight like the walls were sucking in around us. He stepped back, pointed behind him. Another door stood there, identical to the one I'd come through, and behind that, more versions, dozens, lining up, all slightly different, all wearing my face, some smiling, some crying, some twitching with violence, some hollow, and all of them staring straight at me, the me who still thought I was real. That was the trick. That was the final trial, not surviving the house, not escaping her, but proving I was the right one, not to her, to myself. Because somewhere in all that noise, in the broken mirrors and false memories and stolen names, was the truth I had invited her in. I had stayed when I should have run. I had opened the door the first time. The house didn't choose me. It reflected me. It showed me the consequences of 1,000 small decisions I had convinced myself didn't matter. And now I had to carry that truth, or disappear like the rest. I looked at the me holding the list. He looked back, eyes glassy, and then he handed it to me. Just let it fall. I caught it, held it in my shaking hands. Read it, line by line. They were all there. But the last line, the very last one, was new. I hadn't written it. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but it was unmistakable. She never needed to become you. She only needed you to doubt yourself long enough to walk out wearing your skin. I looked up. He was gone. So were the others. Only the door remained. Waiting, I stepped toward it. Paused, glanced at the mirror behind me, because of course there was one. And for the first time since this began, no reflection, only the room, empty, silent, still. And I smiled. Not because I had one, but because I finally understood this house wasn't haunted. And I was the ghost now. The door didn't creak when I opened it. That should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a warning. Doors should resist. They should groan and stretch and scream when you try to push them open after all they've held back. But this one, it opened too easily. Like it had been waiting. Like it knew I'd make it this far. And beyond it, there was no hallway, no room, no twisted geometry or whispering mirror. There was just a corridor of mirrors, dozens, maybe hundreds. Each one pressed shoulder to shoulder, floor to ceiling, facing inward, all turned toward a narrow path that stretched far ahead, lined with flickering lights embedded in a ceiling that curved so gently it felt infinite. The air was still, not silent. There was always something in this place breathing, but still. Unnaturally so, I stepped in. The moment I did, I heard my name, not whispered, not screamed, spoken, from every direction. 1,000 voices, all mine, all different, all slightly wrong. I remember the door, one voice said. I never left, said another. Why would you run? This is the only place you were ever real. The mirrors shimmered as I passed them, each one displaying a different version of me, caught mid-expression, mid-life. One sobbed on the floor. Another laughed with wide, unblinking eyes. One held a knife to its own throat. Another stood with bloodied hands, smiling softly as if it had finally done what needed doing. None of them acknowledged me directly. They just played, looping fragments of lives that could have been mine, or already were. This was the price of escape. This was the test. Not endurance, not courage, recognition. I had to walk through this corridor and remember who I was, exactly who I was, or I'd never find the exit. The first mirror showed me as a child, clutching a stuffed bear with one eye missing. I remembered that bear. My mother had patched it 3 times before finally throwing it away. But in the reflection, the bear whispered something into my ear. Not memory. Infection. The second mirror showed me as a teenager, standing over a broken mirror, bleeding from both hands. I didn't remember that moment, not fully, but I remembered the anger, the helplessness, a sense of being watched while alone, always alone. I kept walking. The third showed me asleep, in the attic, eyes fluttering under closed lids. Something crawled along the ceiling above me. The girl, my twin, not a phantom anymore, just a shape with long fingers and teeth like piano keys, watching me dream. Each mirror fought to pull me in. Not physically. Psychologically. They tempted. Remember this was your fault. You left the door open. You let her in. She is you. That last one cut deepest, because I still didn't know if it was true. Not completely. The corridor grew colder, not physically, but emotionally. The way a room goes cold after bad news. The floor beneath me began to hum, vibrations climbing through my bones. And then, far ahead, I saw it. The end. A single mirror, larger than all the rest, glowing faintly with golden light. The exit. But as I moved closer, the corridor narrowed, and the mirrors became more violent. They didn't show me anymore. They showed what she would do with me. Her walking into the lives I left behind. Her laughing with my mother's voice. Her kissing someone I had once loved and forgotten. Her putting her hands around a stranger's throat while wearing my face. Her growing old, living, thriving, remembered, while I faded. And then, worst of all, the mirror that showed me behind the glass, mouth open, screaming, hands bloodied from trying to punch my way out, watching her take over the world I was too afraid to hold on to. I faltered, stopped walking, because if I moved forward, if I touched the final mirror and stepped through, I'd have to know, wouldn't I? I'd have to choose. Either she made it out, or I did. And if I had to ask which one I was now, hadn't I already lost? The lights flickered. The mirror at the end pulsed. I turned back. All the mirrors behind me had gone black. No faces, no versions. Just endless darkness. There was no going back. There never was. I stepped forward. Slowly, the final mirror towered over me, It no longer showed an exit, it showed a chair. One I remembered, my mother's old chair, in her house, the place I hadn't been in years. It was empty. Then it wasn't. She was there, smiling, not the girl, my mother. Her real smile, no distortion. She opened her arms, welcoming, and then the chair split open, like paper, and she stepped out. The girl, not smiling, not angry, neutral, wearing the last version of my face. She stepped forward, lifted a hand, and pressed it to the glass. I did the same. It was warm, and I understood. We weren't two people anymore. Never had been. We were two outcomes, two possible endings of the same life. Fear, or courage, shadow, or light, hesitation, or choice. And now it was time to decide. The mirror whispered, "You leave alone." I nodded, took a breath, and stepped forward. The glass bent, then broke, not into shards, but into memory. I fell through time, through moments I had forgotten, rewritten, buried. My mother's voice, the bear, the closet, the whispers. The moment I saw her in the mirror and turned away. That was the first mistake. I didn't turn away this time. I looked her in the eye as the mirror swallowed me whole, and for the first time since the house called me in, I was awake. Whether I had escaped, or simply crossed into the better illusion, I didn't know. All I knew was this: I was outside, breathing air, and there were no mirrors in sight. But behind my eyes, a faint shimmer, a breath too many, and a voice that still sounded like mine, whispering, "You chose wrong." The world outside the house was quieter than I remembered, not peaceful, vacant. The sky hung in a dull slate gray, not stormy, not bright, just still. Trees stood motionless in the yard, no birdsong, no wind. The grass didn't sway. Even my footsteps across the gravel drive felt muted, like I was walking through memory instead of soil. I touched the gate, cold, real, rusted, but it moved when I pushed it. It groaned exactly the way I expected it to. That's when the fear started, not a sudden spike, not the kind that jolts the heart, but a slow, rising dread, because everything was too correct, too obedient. I should have felt relief. I should have laughed, cried, run into the road and screamed that I was free. But I didn't. I walked, slowly, cautiously, down the hill and into the town I remembered, Graybridge, or a version of it. It looked the same, on the surface. Same crooked street signs, same pale brick buildings, same peeling paint on the bus stop benches. But there were no people, no movement, just shadows behind curtains that twitched when I looked too long. The storefront windows were too clean, the displays too perfectly arranged, as if someone, or something, had built this place from the pages of my mind and set it up like a stage before I arrived. I walked past the bakery where the old woman had warned me. It was open, warm lights on, fresh loaves in the window, but inside, no one. Just the low hum of something that used to be music playing from a radio that wasn't plugged in. I pressed my hand to the glass. My reflection stared back, normal, at first. Then its smile began to grow, slow, subtle. But I wasn't smiling, not even close. I pulled back, heart pounding. Behind me, footsteps. I turned, nothing. But the air had shifted again. A beat late, like something was trailing me. I moved faster. Past the barber shop, past the bookstore that now displayed nothing but blank covers, past the row of houses that all looked like the one I'd just escaped, identical, silent, still. And then I saw her. Not the girl, not the pale, twisted version I knew from the mirrors, but me, standing at the edge of the sidewalk across the street, dressed in my clothes, hair tied the way I used to wear it 2 years ago, just standing, watching, like she'd been there the whole time. I didn't call out, didn't run, I just froze, and she smiled. A different smile this time, not threatening, not mocking, kind. And I realized the trap, the same trap the house used. It wasn't about horror anymore. It was about comfort. This was her new mask. Not sharp teeth and shadow eyes, but recognition, familiarity. The reflection of who I wished I could be. The version untouched by the mirror. The version that never looked too long or listened too hard. She waved. just once, and walked behind a building. Gone. I chased her. I don't know why. Desperation. Curiosity. The need to see where she went. But when I rounded the corner, there was no building. Just another mirror. Tall. Thin. Freestanding in the middle of an empty street. No stand. No frame. No reflection. Just void. I stepped back. But the pavement rippled. As if rejecting the idea of my escape. I turned around. The town was gone. Replaced by endless mirrors, stacked like buildings, rising into a sky that now wept light instead of rain. I was back. Or maybe I had never left. Maybe the moment I chose, I stopped being the version that could, and now I was the one left behind. The echo. The part that wanders. That walks. That whispers to the next version, trying to get out. Somewhere in a real world. Maybe not far from here, someone wears my face, and they're living just fine. But in their dreams, they see mirrors. In the corners. In puddles. In flickering screens. And sometimes, they see me. Not because I'm trying to haunt them, but because I remember too much. Because I never let go. Because I'm still looking for the door that actually leads out. And they left it open. I stopped calling it a dream the second the town folded in on itself. It didn't collapse. It withdrew. As though the buildings had never been made of stone or wood, but something less solid. Thin sheets of memory that crumpled softly when left alone too long. One moment I stood on cracked pavement, heart pounding in my chest, air thick with the taste of metal. The next, the world around me wrinkled inward like a dried leaf, curling at the edges, until there was nothing but gray light and the echo of a name I no longer trusted as mine. And in the center of it all stood her. Or maybe it was me. The boundary had thinned too much for definitions. She didn't walk now. She slid. Effortless, like wind-wearing skin. Her feet never made a sound. Her smile was fixed but didn't feel frozen. It watched me even when the rest of her face remained still. I couldn't look directly at her anymore, because every time I tried, my own features rearranged in my mind, matching hers piece by piece. Nose first. Then lips. Then eyes that had seen too much and wanted more. She circled me, never quite touching. Her presence was like static beneath my skin, an itch inside the bones. And though her mouth never moved, I heard her voice clearly. Not aloud. Inside me. You're holding on too hard. I clenched my fists, ground my teeth, steadied my breath. What do you? I asked. I didn't expect an answer, but she gave me one. I'm everything you erased. I shook my head. You're not real. That smile again. Neither are you. That stung more than I expected. And worse, it felt like a truth. Not hers, mine. The kind I had whispered to myself in the dark corners of the house, when the walls creaked and the mirrors pulsed. The kind that made you wonder if the person in the reflection was always pretending to be you, and had simply gotten better at it. She turned to one of the mirrors that floated now in the endless gray. Touched it. The surface shimmered, not like water, but like skin under heat. The image inside changed, became a scene. A room I recognized immediately. My childhood bedroom, unchanged. Even the crayon drawing taped to the closet door was still there. Inside, a younger version of me sat cross-legged on the floor, building towers out of wooden blocks. The door creaked open in the reflection, and I watched, helpless, as a shape entered. Not the girl, not the thing I expected, but me. Smiling, older, out of place, out of time. And the child looked up, didn't scream, didn't run, just smiled back, welcomed the copy, accepted it, because it was close enough. And that's when I realized this was never about possession. It was about insertion. Replacing the memory of what was with what fit better. I had rewritten myself 1,000 times to survive. Smoothed over the trauma, cut the jagged edges, painted over the rot, and every time I did, I left her a little more room. I gave her the blueprint, and now she was building something new, inside me. All she needed was the last piece. Doubt, and I'd already given her most of it. I stepped back, away from the mirror. She stepped forward. I moved again. She mirrored it. No, She anticipated it. I was no longer leading the dance. She was. Because the more I fought, the more I showed her how I thought, how I moved, how I broke. And in the distance, somewhere far across this endless gray plain, I heard it. Applause. Slow. Echoing. The sound of an audience not clapping for joy, but out of recognition. Because the performance was nearly perfect. The finale was coming. She raised her hand. One finger pointed up, and suddenly, above us, another mirror cracked open like a sky splitting apart. Not glass, memory. Poured down around us like rain. Fragments of birthdays. Crying fits. Moments in the hallway where I turned my head at the sound of nothing. Reflections I dismissed. Voices I blamed on wind. Every time I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Every time I told myself I was being paranoid. Those were the doorways. And now she was stepping through them all at once. There were hundreds of her now. Each reflection stepping into another, smiling, blending, sharpening, until only one remained, and it looked exactly like me. She stepped closer, touched my chest, right where my heart thudded too fast, and whispered, "Let go." I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. Because I didn't know what I was anymore. Because maybe she was better at this. Because maybe I was the mistake, and she was the corrected version. But just as I felt myself slipping, I remembered the list, the first rule, the one I never wrote but always felt. You do not have to be perfect to be real. I screamed. Not with words, with refusal. The mirror above shattered. The gray plane trembled. She stepped back, eyes wide. For the first time, she looked uncertain, and I ran. Through the space that cracked open. Through the splinters of memory and shape and smoke. Through the breach in the glass that led somewhere new, somewhere unformed. And as I passed through, I felt her hand reach out, not to pull me back, not to strike, but to hold. One last attempt to come with me, to ride that final echo, and become me completely. But I didn't let her. I left her behind, screaming in silence, as the world reassembled around me. And when I looked in the mirror this time, I didn't smile. I just stared, waiting, watching. Because I knew this now, she wasn't gone. She was just further away, and echoes always return. The world I returned to didn't greet me with light. It welcomed me with dust. Fine particles floating in still air, suspended in a room I didn't recognize but somehow expected. The ceiling sagged slightly, stained from leaks that didn't exist, and the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing more wallpaper underneath, older, darker, with symbols I didn't want to understand. I stood motionless, letting the silence settle on my shoulders like a shroud. No ticking clock, no wind outside, no footsteps, just the steady, aching hum of a place that had missed me. Not a homecoming, a return. There's a difference. I moved through the space with caution, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I was afraid of what I wouldn't. No shadows stretched across the floor. No girl in the mirror. No laughter from the attic. Everything that had once stalked the corners of my perception was now gone, or hiding behind the walls. And that's when I heard it, the voice, not hers, mine, faint, muffled. Coming from inside the wall, I pressed my ear to the nearest surface. The wood was warm, like breath had soaked into it over years, and beneath that warmth I heard words, not full sentences, just fragments. Let me try again. I can do it right this time. Don't send me back. I staggered away, because I knew that voice. It was mine, but not the one I used now. It was younger, desperate. A version of myself caught in the machinery of the house, ground down into a ghost before I even knew what I was losing. That's when I realized I hadn't escaped. I just stepped into a quieter part of the trap, the part made for listening, because she didn't always want to wear me. Sometimes she wanted to watch what came next. I turned, scanning the room. There were no mirrors, only picture frames, black and white photos, all slightly blurred, some with my face, others without. And at the center of them all, a frame with no glass, no photo, just a piece of mirror. cut roughly into the shape of a rectangle, hung as if it had always belonged there. I approached it, breath held. The reflection was wrong. Not reversed. Not warped. Paused. I stood still, staring at myself. My reflection didn't move, not a twitch, not a blink. It was like looking at a photograph that knew it should be alive, but had chosen not to be. Then it smiled. A slow, knowing curl of the mouth. And that was when I heard it again, my voice, from the wall. Closer now, more confident. Not a whisper anymore, but a chant. Let me in, let me in, let me in. Each word dripped from the boards like water, like blood. The air shifted. Something behind me. A shadow. No, an outline. Of a door. Not one I could see. One I could feel. It didn't appear. It announced itself. A throb in my skull. A pull in my chest. The space bent around it. I didn't want to open it, but I wanted to know. And that's always been my flaw. Curiosity dressed as courage. So I reached. There was no handle. No lock. Just the shape of a door. I pressed my hand against it. It opened inward, and the voice stopped. The wall went silent. Inside was nothing. No floor. No ceiling. No sound. Only blackness. Heavy. Waiting. I should have walked away. But I leaned in, and from the void I heard a click. A camera shutter. And then, light. A flash just long enough to see what was inside. Just long enough to see a room full of pictures. Of me. Taken at angles I didn't recognize. Moments I didn't remember. Sleeping. Eating. Screaming. One photo showed me standing in a hallway, staring at something out of frame. On the back, scrawled in red, this one believed he made it out. I dropped the photo. Backed out of the void. The doorframe collapsed behind me, sealing itself like stitched skin. The room returned to silence. But my reflection was still smiling. Still frozen. As if it knew. Because it did. Because I had left pieces behind. Not just in the mirror. In her. And now she could watch, could listen. Could learn. Because the voice in the wall. It wasn't mine anymore. It was hers, wearing my voice. Trying it on like a coat. And somewhere, just beyond this thin, soft silence, I knew she was waiting for the next me to listen back. It started with a knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps. Like knuckles against old wood. Waiting not to be answered but acknowledged. I froze in the hallway, spine stiff, ears straining. The knock didn't come from the front door, or any room I recognized. It came from inside. Deep. Buried somewhere behind the walls I had started to believe were finally settling. I should have ignored it. But the house had learned me too well. It knew my weaknesses. Knew I couldn't resist a sound that shouldn't exist. I followed it. Each step forward added weight to the air, like I was walking into pressure, not space. My hands began to tremble. The floor grew uneven, soft beneath my feet, and the wallpaper, once tattered, looked fresh, new, like it had been replaced just moments ago. Another knock. Closer now. Louder. A little more certain. I turned the corner and found a hallway I didn't remember building itself into the space between the sitting room and the back den. A hallway with only one thing at the end of it, a door I had never seen before. It was perfect. Polished black wood. Ornate carvings that shimmered when I looked too long. No dust. No scratches. As if it hadn't been dragged up from the rot like the rest of the house, but rather installed, planted, waiting, and carved into its surface, in letters as fine as surgical incisions, was a single word, my name. I don't mean to say it felt like my name. I mean it was my name, exactly as I speak it in my head. The rhythm, the breath, the self-conscious pause I've always made between the syllables. Not the name I give to strangers. Not the one printed on forms. The real one. The one no one should know but me. The moment I read it, the door breathed, inhaled, exhaled, and I understood it wasn't a door. It was an invitation. No handle, no lock, just the shape of passage, crafted specifically for me, at the exact moment I'd run out of excuses not to go deeper. I stepped forward. The wood trembled under my palm as I pressed it. It opened by itself, and what I saw inside shouldn't have existed. It was my old apartment, exactly as I left it years ago. The blue chair by the window, the chipped coffee table, the faint ring where I spilled wine and never cleaned it properly. Even the humming fridge, with that annoying click that happened at midnight. But it wasn't just the space, it was in use. A jacket over the armrest. My phone on the counter, screen still cracked. Dishes in the sink, it was active. Lived in. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me, soundless. Suddenly I couldn't breathe, because from the bedroom, I heard the shower running. Then, footsteps. Light. Familiar. Someone moving with the exact weight distribution of my own stride. I backed toward the door. It was gone. Nothing but a wall now. Seamless. Perfect. Hello, I called, hating the break in my voice. The water shut off. The footsteps moved closer. I braced myself. And then I walked out of the bedroom. Towel around the waist. Wet hair. Steam rising behind me. Eyes locking onto mine with calm recognition. I didn't flinch. Didn't react. Just smiled. And said, "Took you long enough." I shook my head. No, you're not. I'm not what? He asked. Voice so perfectly mine it felt like my own lungs were echoing. Not real. Not you. Not allowed. He walked past me and sat in the chair by the window. Crossed his legs. Same rhythm. Same old scar on the ankle from a fall at 9 years old. Same mole just beneath the chin. A perfect copy. Except for one thing. The reflection. The window should have shown both of us. It didn't. Only me. He had no reflection. Not even a smudge. "You're not me," I whispered. He shrugged. "I don't have to be. I just have to be here." I felt the room closing in. The apartment was listening. The fridge hummed louder. The click from the motor happened again. The floor creaked at the exact spot near the window. This wasn't a memory. It was reconstruction. "Why this place?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Because this is where you were when you started hearing me." The air rushed out of my lungs. Because he was right. This apartment, years ago, was where the strange dreams began, where the mirror over the sink rippled, where the lights flickered whenever I said my name aloud. I hadn't lived there in forever. I'd convinced myself those were just symptoms of stress, but they were the beginning. The girl had found me back then. She'd marked me. And this version of me, this smooth, confident, anchored presence, he wasn't a ghost, he was the infection. "Why now?" I asked. "Why show me this now?" He stood, stepped close. Close enough to see that his pupils were just a little too wide, that his mouth twitched when he smiled, that his skin was too still. "Because you were winning," he said. "Because you remembered too much." He touched my chest, right where my heart thudded too loud, and said, "So I had to remind you how easy it would be to just live here instead." The apartment dimmed. The walls thickened. I felt myself softening, memory fraying. I couldn't remember what year it was, what day, if I had ever truly escaped the house. Then, a sound. A knock. Not here, outside. A new knock. And this time, it wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. It was someone else. A voice cut through the haze, muffled. Familiar. Calling my name. My real name. The one only I used. The voice of someone I thought I had lost. Someone I had buried in the noise. It was me. The me before all this. Still alive, somewhere outside. Still calling me home. The door, the real one, ripped open. And I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't speak. Didn't wait. I ran through the hallway, through the echoing walls, through the twisted rooms. And as I left that black door behind me, it called my name one last time. Soft, lovingly, like it knew I'd come back. Because the house doesn't lock you in. It just teaches you how to leave. So it knows exactly where you'll return. I don't remember bursting through the last door. I only remember the sensation of falling. Not down, but inward. Like I had collapsed through my own spine and landed somewhere behind my thoughts. There was no impact, no jolt. Just a sudden stop and the unbearable stillness that followed. A liminal pressure pressed down on me, thick and heavy, like the air itself had a body. I was on the floor again, knees bruised, palms scraped, lungs burning from a breath I hadn't taken. But when I opened my eyes, there was no room, no walls, no ceiling. There was only darkness and a single red thread stretched taut across the black. I reached for it, not because I knew what it was, but because my body wanted to. As if it had always been part of me, a vein that had been pulled too far. The moment my fingers touched it, everything around me shuddered. Not violently, not even loudly, just enough to tell me I had moved something I wasn't supposed to. And then the voices returned, not like before, not whispers in the walls. These were inside me, and they weren't hers. They weren't the girl's voice, or the doppelganger's, or even my own fractured thoughts echoing through mirrors. They were familiar. Voices from people I hadn't heard in years. My mother. My childhood friend dead in a car crash when we were 16. A teacher I barely remembered. All of them saying the same thing, wake up. Only they didn't say it like it was a call to rise. They said it like it was a warning. I tried to stand, but the floor moved beneath me like a tide, pulling and pushing with every heartbeat. The red thread was still in my hand, coiling slowly, wrapping around my fingers like it wanted to merge. The longer I held it, the more I remembered, but not memories I had lived. These were foreign, heavy, some horrifying. They crashed through me like blunt weapons. A girl locked in a cabinet for 3 days, nails torn from clawing at the wood. A man sobbing beside a mirror that showed his wife alive, though she'd died years ago. A child watching his reflection twist into something that blinked after he did. These weren't mine, but the thread wanted them to be. It was feeding me borrowed pasts, stitching other people's terror into my fabric. I yanked my hand away. The thread recoiled, snapping back into the dark like a frightened animal. For a moment there was silence again, and then I blinked. The world changed. I was standing in a bedroom. My bedroom. Not as it had been, but as I had remembered it. Every detail shaped by recollection, not accuracy. The slanted books on the shelf. The lamp with the torn shade. The worn grooves in the floor where my chair used to rock. But there was one thing I didn't recognize. A figure in the corner, standing completely still, facing the wall. I couldn't see its face. Just long hair, damp and dark, clinging to its back. The moment I noticed it, my ears filled with a low hum, like a speaker stuck in a feedback loop, not quite peaking but high enough to make my skull buzz. I knew, instantly, not to speak, not to move, not to breathe too loud. Because whatever it was, it didn't know I was there. Yet, I watched it for a long time. Long enough that my legs began to ache. Long enough that the shadows shifted, and the window, one that shouldn't exist, began to reflect both of us. And I saw it then. It was me. But older, hollow, face bruised with sleep, eyes blackened not by injury, but emptiness. A version of me that had never woken up. The humming grew louder. A tone just above my hearing, scraping across my nerves like rusted wire. I turned away from the window, shut my eyes, and that's when I saw her, not in front of me, not behind, but inside, a silhouette pressed against my closed eyelids. She had learned a new trick. She wasn't in the mirrors anymore. She wasn't bound to reflections. She was in the dark. The dark you create when you close your eyes, and if I looked at her too long, even behind the lids, I would let her in, because that's all she needed. Just a glimpse, a moment of permission. She was done with force. Now she waited, coiled in silence, inhabiting every blink, every sleep, every time you rest your head and think you're safe. That's the new mirror. That's the door she prefers now. The one you never think to guard. I snapped my eyes open, gasping, stumbling backward. The figure in the corner hadn't moved, but its shadow had grown. It stretched across the room, rising up the walls, leaking into the ceiling like ink in water. I ran, down hallways that twisted with memory, past doors I didn't recognize but knew led to versions of myself I wasn't ready to meet. I stopped only once, at a door marked with the same red thread I'd touched before. This time, the thread pulsed, and behind it, a sound I couldn't describe, not a voice, not a scream, but the shape of something trying to speak your name through soil. I didn't open it, not yet, but I touched the thread once more, and whispered, "I'm still here." And from the other side something replied, soft, grateful, not for long. The thread didn't recoil this time. It slithered over my skin like it recognized me. Not as a stranger or a threat, but as something familiar, a companion, a keeper of secrets. As it tightened softly around my fingers, the door creaked open, not from my touch, but from the weight of what waited behind it. A darkness spilled out, not in color, but in feeling. It was the kind of dark that smelled like dirt and old cloth, like the inside of a sealed box buried too long. I didn't step back. I should have. But there was something about that scent, that pressure in the air, that invited me forward like a half-remembered lullaby. Inside was no room, no floor, just a pit, wide, endless, and carved into the walls of it, names. Thousands of them, burned deep into the stone with what looked like fingernails, jagged and frantic. I crouched near the edge reading them. Some were common, others strange, some were mine. My full name etched dozens of times. Each instance paired with a different date, a different age. Birth dates that weren't mine. Dates of death I hadn't yet lived. I stood quickly, pulse rising. The thread in my hand pulsed once, tightening like a heartbeat. Then the whispers began again. But not from the pit, from the walls, from the names. They were alive, each name a voice, each voice a memory. Not memories I held, but ones that now held me. I started hearing them, all at once, overlapping, crashing into one another. Screams, pleas. Secrets spoken too late, regrets sharpened by time. Don't forget me, I was first. We all wore your face. You are the only one who made it this far. That's why she wants you most. I staggered back, the pit yawning wider behind me. The edge crumbled beneath one foot, sending stones tumbling into the black. But they never landed, not even a sound, just swallowed. Gone. And then I saw it, near the top of the far wall, a name etched differently from the rest. Smoother, calmer, purposeful. Not scratched in desperation, but carved with care. It wasn't my name, it was hers. The girl's, her real name. The one no one had spoken. The one no one remembered. Not until now. I read it aloud before I could stop myself. And the moment I did, everything froze. The pit went still. The voices went silent. The thread went slack, and then the walls screamed. Not in sound, but in vibration. Deep. Bone-rattling pulses that made my vision blur. The names began to fade. Not all at once, but line by line. As though the act of speaking her name erased the others. The thread slithered free from my hand, dropping to the ground like a dead snake. And from inside the pit, she rose. Not crawling, not climbing, floating. Her face wasn't mine now. It wasn't hers either. It was a concentration of all the names. A shifting, grotesque patchwork of every voice I'd heard. Eyes that didn't match. Lips that quivered with unfinished words. Skin that rippled with images. Scenes of lives stolen, rewritten, worn like clothes. When she spoke, it wasn't with sound. It was inside me. You called me by name. I backed away, but she didn't follow. She just hovered there, the pit barely holding her weight, as if the world itself was deciding whether or not to allow her presence. You remembered what they forgot. Her voice was layered now, 100 tones threaded together, soft, deadly, curious. Do you know what that makes you? I didn't answer. Because I did. It made me the next vault. The next shell to carry her forward. The next name to etch into the wall, not out of memory, but out of necessity. But I wasn't ready to be that. Not yet. So I did the only thing I could. I stepped forward. Not into the pit. Not toward her. But into the wall. I pressed my hands against the stone, feeling it resist me, then yield. Like it recognized me too. And I began to scratch, with broken nails and raw skin. I scratched a name. My name, one last time, but instead of a date, I left it blank. An unfinished sentence, a defiance. If I was going to be written into this place, it would be on my own terms. Behind me, I heard her laugh. No malice, no joy, just acceptance. As if she knew this was the only way it could ever end. Then she sank back into the pit, folding inward like a dream collapsing on itself. The thread coiled up and disappeared, and the door behind me creaked open once again. I stepped out, not into safety, but into a world that waited. A world I'd have to walk carefully in. Because now, I knew the truth. She didn't chase the ones who forgot her. She chased the ones who remembered. And somewhere inside me, the name I spoke still whispered itself in the quiet. Waiting for the moment, I closed my eyes too long and forgot who it really belonged to. The door closed behind me with a softness that felt deliberate, as if it didn't want to startle me. As if it knew I'd be back. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The space I stood in now pulsed with a low rhythm, like the heartbeat of a place still waking up. It wasn't dark, not exactly. There was light, but it came from nowhere, and it cast no shadows. It just was. I found myself in a hallway again, long and winding, but this time the air had changed. It smelled like damp wood, old ink, and something else. Construction. Not the fresh, hopeful kind, but the damp, aching kind of rooms being built in places they don't belong. As I took a step, the floor beneath me moved, not in a jarring way, but subtly, adjusting. It lengthened with my stride, walls pushing back just far enough to let me pass. It was like walking through a lung, breathing, reacting, learning. I looked to my right and found a door, new, unpainted, no knob. I looked left, another door, this one cracked open, light flickering within. I didn't choose either. Instead, I stood still, and the hallway grew impatient. It started to shift again, gently at first, stretching and compressing like it was deciding what I needed, and then faster. Doors vanished, new ones formed. Some were massive, cathedral-like, with intricate carvings that pulsed faintly. Others were too small to crawl through. One was just a frame with no wall behind it, revealing a forest swaying in moonlight. Another revealed a hospital room with no bed. Another, a classroom filled with mannequins. Every head turned toward the chalkboard where the word Ron was written in chalk, so thick it looked like it had blood. I closed my eyes. It didn't help. Because the rooms were in my head now, too. I could feel them pressing behind my eyes, building themselves with scraps of memory and fear. I knew this trick. It wasn't just haunting me. It was mapping me. Every fear, every regret, every unspoken thought. They were bricks. My hesitation was mortar. The guilt was the framework. I opened my eyes. The hallway was gone. I stood in a house now. But not the house. Not the one I had escaped. This one was newer, a replica. Incomplete. Walls stood unfinished, beams exposed, wires hanging loose. No mirrors yet, but I knew they'd be added soon. It was her work. She was building again, preparing the next layer of the trap. And this time, it wasn't just for me. It was for whoever I brought back. That was the pattern. You survive, you remember, and then you lead someone else in. Sometimes by accident, sometimes with good intentions. The house fed on the handoff. It wasn't a prison. It was a relay. A curse passed along like a story whispered in sleep, and I had whispered it more times than I could count. I stepped into a half-finished living room. The floor was carpeted in thick dust, but only in the center. The edges were clean, too clean. Someone had walked this space recently, or was still here. I crouched, touched the floor. The dust was warm, and then I heard it, hammering. Far off, rhythmic, measured, a sound that should have meant safety, work, creation. But here, it was a heartbeat. I followed it, through the empty kitchen, down the basement stairs that hadn't existed a moment ago, into the dark. The deeper I went, the louder it became. Not just hammering now, sawing, scraping, whispering. The kind of sounds you'd hear behind drywall if the walls were still learning to lie. And then I reached the bottom, no floor. Just a space filled with fog and scaffolding. Tall, twisting, endless. Someone was building the house from the inside out. I saw her then. Not the girl, not the reflection. Someone else. Someone new. Back turned, hair matted, overalls soaked in sweat. She hammered a nail into an invisible wall, then pulled out another board from the mist and slammed it in place. Over and over. Never stopping, I called out. No answer. I stepped closer, and that's when she froze. Her head tilted, but not toward me. Toward the structure. Listening, like it had spoken, like it had corrected her. She turned around slowly, and I gasped. It was my mother, but not the version I remembered, younger. Tired. Her face hollowed by decades I hadn't lived yet. She looked at me, eyes glassy, and said, "You weren't supposed to come here. I didn't choose this." I whispered. "You remembered," she said. "That's worse." The hammer dropped from her hand. The sound it made when it hit the fog. Not metal on floor, but splashing, like it had vanished into something deep, something wet. The scaffolding creaked. I looked up. People hung in the rafters. Dozens of them. Some I knew. Most I didn't. Eyes closed, mouths open. Every face frozen in the same expression. Relief. That terrified me more than anything. Relief meant acceptance. Relief meant they had given in. My mother stepped forward, held out her hand. "If you take this," she said, "you'll never have to carry any of it again." I looked down. In her hand was a mirror shard, shaped like a key. I backed away. She didn't follow. She just lowered her hand and turned back to the wall, started building again, hammer, nail, whisper. Repeat. Behind me, the stairs were gone. Only more scaffolding now, twisting into the mist, and somewhere in the distance, another room began to form. A new trap. A new door. With your name on it. His name was Elias. I found it scribbled in charcoal on the underside of a crooked stair that hadn't existed the day before. 4 thick letters, smeared as if the person who wrote them was shaking. Or fading. I said the name out loud without thinking, and the house responded immediately. The boards under my feet moaned. The lights, if you could even call them that, dimmed to a faint, sickly hue. And somewhere far above, a door I hadn't opened in years clicked shut. The house knew Elias. And it didn't like the reminder. I pressed my hand against the name, and just for a second I saw him. Not in the way I had seen the girl. Not like a phantom or a reflection. This was different. I saw Elias like a photograph burned into the air, tall, wary. Eyes sunken not from exhaustion, but from exposure to something he shouldn't have seen. He was wearing a flannel shirt 2 sizes too big and holding a notebook. His mouth was open, caught mid-sentence. And then he vanished. It was like watching a ghost caught in rewind. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because later, hours, maybe minutes, time didn't mean anything anymore. I turned a corner and found a door already open. Beyond it, a study. One I'd never seen before, though it smelled achingly familiar dry paper, old coffee, and something faintly sweet, like rotting citrus. Books lined the walls, stacked on chairs. Floated across the floor like they'd tried to escape whatever had written them. And in the center of it all, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the mess, was Elias. Not dead, not a ghost. Breathing. He didn't look up at me right away. He just kept flipping through a ragged notebook, whispering to himself. His lips were cracked. His nails chewed down. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, or hadn't needed to. When he finally looked up, his eyes locked on mine with the desperate clarity of someone who had seen the edge of the world and stepped over it. "You remember her," he said. It wasn't a question. "You said her name," he continued. "Didn't you? That's how she knows you're still worth watching." I nodded slowly. "She doesn't let go," he added. "Not when you see her. But when you know her." He tapped his temple. "That's when it gets worse." I stepped further into the study. The books weren't just stories, they were logs. Journals. Hundreds of them. Every spine was marked with a date, some going back decades, some written in languages I couldn't even read. I crouched beside one and flipped it open. Every page was a record of someone's stay in the house. Elias pointed to the shelves behind him. They think writing it down helps, that it keeps her out, that she doesn't read. He laughed, hollow and humorless. But she does. Oh, she reads every word. That's why the house changes. It uses your stories to build better rooms, smarter traps. You leave breadcrumbs, and she bakes with them. I felt a chill cut through me. How long have you been here? Elias shrugged, since I forgot how I got in. That answer should have made no sense, but it made perfect sense. He hadn't been living in the house. He had been remembering it, over and over. Stuck in a loop where each memory fed the next room. He wasn't trapped physically. He was trapped in narrative. The moment he found the thread of truth, the house rewrote him into a new chapter. I tried burning it, he said suddenly. The house. He laughed again. The pages. The journals. Every time I tore them up or set them on fire, they just came back. Sometimes in my own handwriting, sometimes in hers. I paused. She writes in them. He nodded. Sometimes. When she wants you to skip ahead. When she's impatient. He held up the notebook in his lap. The page was blank, except for one sentence. You will lead the next one. The words weren't written in charcoal. Not ink. Not even blood. They were scratched into the page, etched so deep the letters tore through 5 layers. He tore out the page, crumpled it, and threw it across the room. It hit the floor, then vanished. Elias stood, slowly. Every joint cracked. He walked to the only uncovered window in the study, a small, circular pane of glass shaped like a porthole. I followed him, expecting to see the fog, or the void, or the endless scaffolding I'd come to associate with the house's deeper levels. But what I saw instead was outside. Trees, a road, a figure walking. Freedom, it was right there, but the window was thick, too thick. I pressed my palm to the glass. Elias did the same beside me. She shows it to you when she's close, he whispered. The way out. Just to see what you'll do. I leaned in. Can you reach it? Elias looked at me then, not with hope, but pity. I already did, he said. I blinked. What? I left, he said. Once, maybe twice. I don't know. But every time I woke up back in this room. Sometimes with fewer pages, sometimes with more. He pulled up his sleeve, showed me his arm, dozens of tally marks carved into the skin. He pointed to the last one. Faded. Still healing. This time, he said, I didn't count. I stepped back. Because I understood. Elias wasn't trapped by the house anymore. He was trapped by the idea of escape. It dangled freedom just close enough to keep him trying, each attempt feeding her more memories, more structure, more foundation. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a blueprint. And the house was still building with him. He sat back down in the center of the books, picked up his pen, and began to write. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. Because even though I knew the truth, part of me wanted to believe he was wrong. Part of me wanted to open that window and try. But I turned away, because belief was how she got you. Not all at once. Not with fear, with hope. Because in this house, hope is the sharpest tool of all, and the most dangerous rooms are the ones that look like doors. I left Elias behind. Though I'm not sure you can ever really leave someone in this place. The moment you know them, the house knows you know them, and that's enough. The connection becomes a tether, something invisible and cruel, always pulling you back toward their unfinished story. But I kept walking anyway. Through the study. Past the window that showed freedom but wouldn't break. I didn't look back, and Elias didn't speak again. The scratching of his pen followed me down the hall, like a metronome counting out the seconds I still had left. The hallway twisted, then narrowed, and then opened into a wide circular chamber with walls that moved ever so slightly, as if they were breathing. And in the center of that chamber, coiled like a snake swallowing its own tail, was a staircase, but not one that went up or down. It went both. Each step was set in contradiction. From the base, it spiraled upward, winding into darkness. But when I looked again, it also fell. Same direction, Same shape, but impossible. I couldn't tell which way was real, whether I'd climb toward something or sink into it. I should have turned around. But the house didn't allow that anymore. Behind me, the hallway I came from was gone, replaced by a wall slick with condensation and breathing sounds, low and wet. I was being herded now, gently but insistently. I placed my foot on the first step. It felt like gravity shifted, like my stomach dropped even though I hadn't moved. I took another step. The air grew colder. My breath became visible. Another step. Then another. And then the lights went out. All of them. Darkness swallowed everything. And in the dark, the staircase shifted. The motion was subtle at first, like a rotating spiral. But then I realized it wasn't just turning. It was deciding, like it was alive, choosing a direction based on what it read in me. Every doubt, every secret, every fear I hadn't spoken aloud. It read me in turn. I wasn't walking anymore. I was being taken. Faster now. The walls stretched around me. The steps moved beneath my feet without effort. And then, something else joined me. Footsteps. Behind me. Matching mine exactly. One for one. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. I didn't speak. Didn't turn around. Because I knew. It was her. Not the girl. Not the reflection. Not the mother or Elias. Or the version of me that smiled too late. It was the house's first story. The one it never let end. The one that bled into every room and reappeared in every eye that held too much memory. She wasn't just watching now. She was walking with me. I reached for the railing, but it wasn't wood anymore. It pulsed under my fingers. Not alive, but not dead either. More like a vessel. Skin stretched over something solid, warm and firm, like a spine wrapped in leather. I kept going. There was no other choice. And then, the steps ended. Not at a door, not at a room, but at another staircase, inverted, like a reflection hanging above me. And standing at the base of that staircase, looking down at me through the void, was myself. But not a double, not a copy. This version was tired, older, covered in dust, eyes red, rimmed and wide, and behind him I saw doors, hundreds, floating in the blackness, spinning slowly, some open, some sealed shut, some cracked just enough to let something slip through. The older me reached out a hand. "I finally figured it out," he said. His voice was hoarse, distant. "The staircase isn't a path, it's a filter." He gestured upward. "Everyone climbs it, but only some make it out. The rest become rooms." He pointed to the doors behind him. They were people once. He looked at me, almost apologetic. "You will be too." The ground beneath my feet trembled. I looked down. The steps I'd taken were disappearing, one by one. Not crumbling, smoothing over. Becoming part of the spiral. Erasing the path behind me. I looked back up. The other me offered his hand again. "You can come now, but you have to give something." "What?" I asked, throat dry. "Your name," he said. "The real one. The one you haven't said since the first time she touched you." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because I knew what would happen if I did. He nodded. Slowly. "That's why I'm still here." And then, like a puppet with cut strings, he collapsed. Gone. Fell upward, into the dark. The doors began to drift away. The steps around me began to fold inward. And I stood in the center of the spiral, held still by gravity and fear, and the realization that I was already part of the house. Maybe I always had been. Because the truth. You don't build a place like this from scratch. You inherit it, and the staircase. It doesn't go up or down. It goes inward, toward the center. Toward the first nail driven in the first plank by the first voice that begged not to be forgotten. And now that I'd walked it, the house was building me a room of my own. I didn't know how long I stood in that spiral. Time inside the house had long since stopped being a straight line. It curled in on itself like smoke, circling in layers, and by now I had breathed in too much of it. But I wasn't falling. Not anymore. I was waiting. The steps beneath me had flattened into a surface, and the staircase itself had folded into the void, vanishing without fanfare. No more directions. No more guidance. Just a silence so thick it felt like the walls of the house had paused to listen. And then it came. A whisper. Not from around me. Not from below. But from within the walls. A whisper with no voice. Just breath. It wasn't calling for help. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was doing something much worse. It was inviting me. Calling me by the name I'd stopped using long ago. The one the house shouldn't have known. The name only my mother used the night she disappeared. That's when the walls cracked. Not loudly, not suddenly. They split like skin stretched too far, and through that split, a door formed. Unlike the others, this door wasn't made of wood or glass or anything solid. It was made of fabric. Old, thick canvas. The kind that hangs in forgotten hospitals or between aisles of dusty storage. It didn't open with a handle. It simply parted as I stepped through, and what lay beyond was a room. My room, but not my room. It was how it looked before everything began. Before the nightmares. Before the mirrors. Before the name in the floorboards and the girl in the walls. My bed was made. The air smelled faintly of detergent and a childhood I'd convinced myself had been ordinary. The posters were still up. The clock still ticked. My old notebook sat stacked in the corner, dustless, untouched. But the real horror wasn't in what was there. It was in what wasn't. The room had no door behind me. No way out, no light source, no sound. Yet somehow, I could still see. And then I realized what was missing. Me. There were no reflections, no shadows, no sense of a body beneath my feet. I looked down, and there was nothing. No hands, no legs, no shape. It wasn't just that I couldn't see myself. I couldn't feel myself. I was being peeled away. Unwritten. As if the room had started editing out unnecessary characters and had decided I was one of them. The whisper came again. Only now it had words. Sit. A chair formed behind me, sudden and soundless. It didn't wait for me to move toward it. It pulled me in. And then the room shifted. Not like a door opening, but like a memory replaying. A projector I hadn't noticed flickered to life in the corner, casting images onto the far wall. They were of me, but not memories I recognized, not scenes I'd lived. They were versions, dozens, hundreds, each of them slightly wrong. One version showed me screaming in a bathtub while the water slowly turned black. Another showed me standing perfectly still as someone behind me raised a hammer. Another, I couldn't even process. It was just static with my voice, repeating a phrase over and over in a language I didn't know. And in every image, at the edges of the frame, was her. Always watching. Sometimes smiling. Sometimes weeping. Always present. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat like hooks. Because I wasn't meant to speak, I was meant to watch. This was the room's purpose, to show me what I could have been, what I had been, what I might still become. The reel stopped, and then, for the first time, the room spoke with her voice. Pick one. I couldn't answer. But I didn't need to. The floor beneath me lit up with squares, each one a trapdoor with a face on it. My face. Different again in each one. Scarred, smiling, blank, terrified. And each face mouthed a different phrase, let me out. Choose me. We can start over. End it here. Let her in. I stepped off the chair. Knees weak. The floor throbbed beneath me, like a living thing demanding I decide which version of me would go forward. This was it. The moment the house stops chasing. When it starts replacing. I closed my eyes and saw her. Clearer than ever. The girl. But not as a victim. Not as a ghost. As the first door. The first sacrifice. The blueprint. She had never been hunting me. She had been guiding me, training me, so that I could take her place. So that I could build. Because every house needs a heart. And I was the only one who had survived enough to become one. But I wasn't ready. I opened my eyes, and I jumped, not into a trapdoor, not into a version, through the floor. Through the cracks she left behind, a flaw in the design, a mistake not even she could patch fast enough. And I fell again, through unfinished rooms, past doors made of screams and corridors built from memories. And as I fell, I heard the house groan, not in pain, in disappointment, because I had chosen neither. And for now, I was still mine. I hit the ground harder than I should have. Not the kind of pain that breaks bones, but the kind that shudders through your nerves like they're being rewired. The floor was cold metal, slick beneath my palms, and for a moment I lay there, unsure if I'd landed in a room or in some space between. Then the lights clicked on, stuttering, flickering, humming with that sickly, electric buzz that makes your teeth ache just hearing it. This place was different, sterile, clinical. The walls were white tile, but stained. Not with dirt, not with mold, with lines, black lines like veins drawn by a shaking hand, crisscrossing every surface, ceiling, floor, walls, even the fixtures. It looked like someone had sketched an architectural plan over the room while going slowly mad. The lines bled from corners, from shadows, and some of them even moved. Not quickly, but in the way a living vine might stretch, just enough to let you know it's watching. At the center of the room stood a table, and on that table, splayed open, was a blueprint, drawn on what looked like skin, not paper, not fabric. Something organic. It pulsed. I stepped closer, hesitant. The lines on the walls began to twitch in rhythm with my heartbeat, like they were sensing to me, adapting. When I looked down at the blueprint, I expected to see the house, rooms, stairs, the mirrored halls, maybe the endless scaffolding. But it wasn't just the house, it was me, a floor plan of my body, labeled, segmented, studied. Rooms placed where organs should be, hallways branching from arteries. A staircase spiraling down through where the spine belonged. The eyes weren't labeled as eyes. They were observation windows. The tongue was the door that should not speak. The heart was blank. Just an empty space with the words, "under construction." I staggered back. The blueprint twitched. And suddenly, the lines on the walls began pulling away from their fixed paths. They lifted, twisting in the air like wires looking for a socket. And they found one. Me? One coiled around my wrist, another around my ankle, another around my throat. They weren't choking me, not yet. They weren't dragging me toward the table. They were measuring, mapping, adding new lines to the blueprint even as I stood there. Because I hadn't just escaped into a room. I had escaped into a design space. A place where the house built its next iteration. Its future wings. Its deeper traps. It wasn't just reading me. It was installing me. I pulled free barely. The lines snapped back like rubber bands, retracting into the ceiling. But the blueprint, it was still updating. My movements, my thoughts, my fears. They were all etched there now. A perfect diagram of everything I'd seen, remembered, regretted, and beneath it all, a single note scratched in smaller writing, "This one is learning too fast." That's when I knew. This wasn't just a prison or a haunting. This was an evolution. The house wasn't content to remain static. It changed. It grew. It built itself from what it consumed, like a parasite wearing the skin of its hosts. And now, it had me recorded. It didn't need to chase me anymore. It could simply replicate me. Use what it had drawn. Construct me, shaped rooms filled with me, shaped logic, designed to lure the next victim with familiarity. A hallway that creaked like my childhood home. A whisper in my voice. A journal written in my scrawl, full of truths I'd never dared say aloud. And I realized something then: if it could build me, it could build others too. Everyone I thought I'd met, Elias, the mother, the girl, any of them could have been echoes. Blueprints gone rogue. Traps built from pain so specific it had to feel real. But what if none of them were? What if the house had written their stories and played them back for me like recordings, dressing up its halls in lies and watching me react? And if that was true, how many of them had ever been real? I grabbed the edge of the table, flipped it with all the strength I had. The blueprint fluttered, screaming, not in sound, but in emotion. Grief, panic, anger. It burned itself midair, curling into ash that never touched the floor, disappearing into the tiles like blood into gauze. The room responded immediately. Every line on the wall surged toward me at once. 100 veins of darkness, each one sharper now, more needle than wire. I ran, found a door that hadn't existed seconds before and shoved through it. But the next room didn't give me relief. It was worse. A corridor. White. Endless. Lined with mirrors on both sides, but not the trick kind. Not warped. Not cracked. Clean. Unforgiving. And in every reflection I wasn't me. I was another version. Some with hollow eyes. Some smiling too wide. One missing a face entirely. They followed as I walked, moving just out of sync, like they were watching me and not copying. And then, one of them stopped. I kept walking. It stayed still. It watched, and smiled. The corridor trembled, and the whisper came again, her voice, this time clear. You gave me the blueprint. I stopped walking, because she wasn't wrong. In trying to escape, in resisting, in running, I'd shown her every rote, every weakness, every piece of myself. And now, she didn't need to haunt me. She could be me. She already was. And the house. It wasn't building rooms anymore. It was building a replacement. There was a door at the end of the corridor, barely visible past the endless mirrors that stretched on like teeth. It didn't call to me, didn't whisper, didn't flicker with the invitation most doors in this house did. No. This one simply existed. The way a predator exists in the brush before you ever sense its breath. It wasn't trying to trick me. It didn't need to. I was already walking toward it, step after step, surrounded by reflections that were now moving independently, glancing at me, pausing mid-motion, flicking their eyes toward one another as if waiting for the moment to speak. And just before I touched the door, one of the reflections whispered, "That's not a door. That's a womb." The glass cracked. A hairline fractured down the center of the reflection's face. Its smile didn't falter, but its eyes filled with blood. I didn't stop to ask what it meant. I pushed the door open. I didn't step into a room. I stepped into breath. The air was alive, thick, humid, humming with a soft murmur like lungs inhaling in the walls. This wasn't a place built to hold someone. It was built to birth someone. I blinked once, twice, trying to adjust to the light, but there was no real light. Just a dim pulsation that throbbed beneath the walls, like heat behind skin. The walls were veined. Not metaphorically, literally. They pulsed with movement beneath a translucent layer that might have once been plaster, now turned semi-organic, yellowed, soft, and I realized this room was older than the others. Much older. It wasn't a new trap, it was the first. This was where it started. The first room. The original seat of the house. It wasn't the girl who had been first. She was just the first captured. This place had waited, grown. Layer by layer, sorrow by sorrow. A parasite in a dress of wood and reflection. And now, I had stepped into the womb of the house itself. There was something in the center. A cradle, not made of wood, bone. Human bone. Long femurs bent and warped into curved supports, ribs forming the frame. And in the cradle, wrapped in something that looked like a shroud of stitched together wallpaper and skin, was a form. Small, shifting, as if undecided. I stepped closer. The walls quivered. I reached the cradle and looked inside. It was me, but not quite. The face was half-formed, caught mid-shift. Eyelids fluttering even in sleep. Hands twitching, fingers curling in and out like they were learning what they were for. And around its throat was a thin thread of mirror, cut from some earlier version of the house, braided and cruel. The moment I saw it, my knees buckled, because I remembered. Not in words, not in scenes, in feeling. I had been here before, not as a visitor, as a beginning. This version of the house wasn't growing towards something. It was growing back, trying to recreate the first host that ever understood it. The first one who looked at the shifting walls and didn't scream but asked why, and I had asked. All along. With every choice, every whisper, every refusal to forget, I had given the house its first taste of curiosity, and now it wanted to start again. with me. Not as I am, but as I was, before the knowledge, before the scars. Before I tried to escape, it wanted to birth me again. And this time, it would raise me the right way. I reached into the cradle and touched the barely formed version of myself. Its skin was ice, cold. But its eyes opened. They weren't mine. They were hers. She smiled through my mouth and whispered, "This time, I'll do it better." The walls screamed, not with sound, but pressure. The floor split. The cradle began to sink, not into the ground, but into the house, absorbed, as if the foundation itself was reclaiming its child. And I understood the truth, sudden and sharp and awful. This house doesn't just trap you. It multiplies you. You become its template. It doesn't feed on fear. It feeds on versions. It's not a place you die in. It's a place you duplicate. I ran. For the first time in a long while. I didn't walk, didn't inch, didn't listen for whispers. I ran. Through a doorway that tore itself open as I screamed. Down a corridor made of lung and bone. Over a floor that tried to open beneath me like a mouth. And as I sprinted, the walls began whispering again. Not to me, but about me. He remembers. He escaped too early. He wasn't supposed to see that room. Doors slammed shut behind me. The hall warped. The light dimmed. And then suddenly, without warning, silence. I found myself in a normal room. No pulses, no veins, just four walls, a desk, a mirror, and on the desk, a note, handwritten, scrawled in my own script. It read, "Don't look in the mirror. It remembers what you forgot." I turned away from it and sat down, because I knew what this was now. Not the end. Not an escape. Just another version. Another loop. Another me being written. The house hadn't failed. It had succeeded. Because I hadn't destroyed it. I had only fed it. With memory. And once you feed the house, it never stops growing. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I sat at the desk, back rigid, breath caught somewhere between lungs and throat. The silence was no longer a mercy. It had a weight to it, a waiting quality, like a held breath before a scream. Behind me, the mirror stood untouched, just as the note warned. But I could feel it, not with sight or sound, with a strange, vibrating awareness. The way a body feels the presence of something watching through a keyhole. The mirror wanted me to look, but not so I could see myself. It wanted to see me. I reached for the note again, trying to remember writing it, but the paper was still warm. That was impossible. Unless I had just done it. Unless I had sat in this very room before. Unless every version of me who reached this point had written the same warning to the next. I turned the note over. There was more on the back, but the words were not mine. Turn around and the story restarts. Stay still and the house will ask you a question. Below that, one final line you will want to answer. Do not. I dropped the note. The air changed instantly. It went from still to pregnant with something electric. The walls buzzed, not with light but with thought. The air itself seemed to thicken. The room began breathing in time with me. And then, from all four walls in perfect unison, a voice emerged. My voice. But it was wrong. Too steady. Too smooth. Too perfect. It sounded like a version of me that had never doubted a thing. A voice sculpted to command belief. You are the one who remembered too much, it said. I didn't answer. You are the one who refused the script. Still, I remained silent. You are the infection. The misprint. The question mark in a house that only wants periods. That last line made something in me recoil. A house that only wants periods. Endings. Statements. Absolutes. It didn't want questions, didn't want curiosity. It wanted compliance. Obedience. Memory without context. Fear without resistance. The voice leaned in closer, though no body followed. You are not supposed to wonder. You are supposed to weep. I clenched my jaw. The mirror behind me trembled. I didn't turn. The voice paused, as if waiting. Then it asked the question. One question. Simple. Final. Do you want to go home? It echoed through me. Not just through my ears, but into the meat of my brain, my spine, my ribs. It was not a suggestion. It was a test. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to say yes. Every part of me did. Every tired bone, every cracked thought. Every memory that felt like glass grinding behind my eyes. But I knew better. I didn't speak. The silence stretched long and hard. The walls groaned. And then the voice laughed. Short. Tight. Pleased. You're learning, it said. Then the mirror spoke, but not in my voice. Not hers either. It was something older. A voice that rasped and rolled, dry as parchment, soaked in ancient dust. You know what happens to the ones who learn, it said. They build wings. I finally turned, not to look into the mirror, but to face it. It no longer reflected me. It showed a staircase, a familiar one, spiraling both up and down, but this time cracked down the center. A figure stood at its base, arms open wide. Elias. But he was different now. Eyes blind, face blank, smile missing, no journal, no hope, just a shell. One I could step into. One the house had prepared. The mirror pulsed, and behind the image of Elias more figures appeared. Hundreds, thousands, all faceless. All former visitors. All trapped in versions of themselves that had been stripped, hollowed, repurposed. The mirror spoke again. Choose a shell, and we will rewrite you. No, I whispered. It didn't hear, or it did, and simply didn't care. Because the glass cracked again, this time from the inside. A hand pushed through, pale, familiar, mine, the other me. The one still sleeping in the bone cradle. The one being nurtured in the heart of the house. The one designed to replace me perfectly. He stepped through, not as a reflection, but as a body, fully formed, alive, real, and smiling. He sat in the chair across from me, mirroring my every breath, posture, blink. It wasn't mimicry. It was competition. Only one of us was going to leave this room, and he had the house behind him. I stood. So did he. He raised a hand. So did I. But I stopped. He didn't. His hand kept rising until it pressed against his own throat, fingers flexed. And then he peeled. His face slid away like wet cloth, revealing not muscle or bone beneath, but walls, wallpaper, wood grain, windows. He wasn't a person. He was a model, a walking house. And in his hollow chest, I saw dozens of names scrawled in blood. Every person who had come before me. Every one the house had digested. My name was at the bottom, still wet. I lunged at him, and my hands passed through. Because there was nothing there, just invitation. A final choice, become a room, or build one. Behind me the door creaked open, and beyond it, a hammer, nails, a blueprint drawn in skin. The house was ready. Ready for its next architect, and it wanted me to begin. I stood in the open doorway, the hammer cold in my hand, the blueprint pulsing gently beneath it like a sleeping creature waiting to be awakened. The air smelled like old copper and sawdust and blood too ancient to rot. Behind me, the mirror had gone dark. The shell that wore my face was gone. Melted back into the reflection like it had never stood here at all. But I remembered. I remembered everything. And that was the real horror now, that I was no longer just running from the house. I understood it. Worse, I understood the logic of its hunger. The blueprint on the table was incomplete, deliberately so. It had the outline of a room, the frame of something small and suffocating, but the center, the heart of the structure, was empty. A blank space waiting to be filled. A missing nail. And on the table beside it, half driven into the wood, was just that a single iron nail, ancient and still warm. Twitching slightly, as if responding to a heartbeat I couldn't yet hear. I should have turned back. But back didn't exist anymore. There was no exit, no corridor, no staircase, just this room, this blueprint, this task. The house didn't kill you with fangs or fire. It enlisted you. It waited until you knew just enough to want to fix something, to change something, to answer a question that had no safe answer. And then it handed you a hammer. The moment I touched the blueprint, I saw everything. Every room I had ever walked through. Every scream that echoed too long. Every mirror that turned to watch me as I passed. And I saw them not as traumas, but as drafts, rough designs, early sketches. The house had never been random, it had always been composing. Every room had purpose. Every hallway a rhythm. Every dead end, every trapdoor, every ghosted whisper. Measured. Refined. This place was a machine disguised as a nightmare, and it needed me to write the next chapter. The hammer pulsed in my palm, impatient. I reached for the nail. But it moved before I touched it. It twisted slowly, rotating without contact, and I realized it wasn't waiting for me to use it. It was waiting to judge me. Because this wasn't a test of will anymore. It was a test of intention. Did I want to build? Or did I just want the nightmare to obey? I didn't answer out loud, but the house heard anyway. The room changed. The walls pulled back, stretching wide like the lungs of a dying god, and I saw them other rooms being built in real time around me. Rooms filled with people, or pieces of them. Faces blurred by memory. Hands reaching for doors they couldn't open. Voices repeating the same 10 words over and over like mantras in a language they barely understood. And above all of them, on a high, impossible ceiling, a single sentence was carved into the stone. He who remembers the most builds the strongest lie. That's what the house wanted from me. Not truth, not fear, my lie, my version of how it all began. And I knew what that meant. If I chose to build, I wouldn't just be contributing. I would be cementing, turning questions into answers, mystery into scripture, a horror into a blueprint. I looked back at the twitching nail. It had gone still, waiting, deciding. I picked it up, held it to the blank heart of the page, and for just a moment, I saw what I would create if I drove it in a small room, child-sized, 4 walls, no windows, a mirror on each wall, none of them reflecting the same person, and in the center, a wooden cradle, rocking, empty. But every time someone looked away, the cradle would fill again, with someone new. Someone screaming. Someone remembering something they shouldn't. And I realized the truth, the terrible, final truth. There was never just one house. There were thousands, built by survivors, by cowards, by architects of their own trauma, passed from generation to generation, like songs, like sins. Each room carried in memory, seated in dreams, waiting to take root. The house doesn't trap you, it teaches you. And when you've learned enough, it hands you a hammer. The blueprint in front of me pulsed again, faster now. The nail in my hand began to smoke, and behind me I heard footsteps. Soft, bare, childlike, coming closer, closer. A whisper brushed my neck. Not hers, mine. If you don't finish the room, someone else will. I slammed the hammer down. A nail screamed. The blueprint caught fire. And the house, oh God, the house shuddered. Not in rage, not in pain. In recognition. Because I had built something new, not a prison, not a trap, an escape, but not for me, for whoever came next. The fire didn't spread. It didn't burn wildly or roar in fury. It seeped. A slow, hungry smolder that devoured only the blueprint. Not the table, not the floor. Not even the nail that now sat embedded in the scorched wood like a relic. The flames were red at first, then dimmed to black, then vanished entirely. What remained wasn't ash, but void. A square of nothing, a hole in the world the size of a room's heart. I stared into it and saw no bottom. No light, no reflection. Just absence. It was then I realized I hadn't destroyed the room. I'd done something far worse. I had unwritten it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was watching. I could feel it, the house around me, stilled, unsure. Like it hadn't expected me to choose creation without submission. Like it hadn't accounted for rebellion in the form of design. Rooms were meant to be traps, it seemed. Cages of sorrow and memory. But I had drafted a door. I hadn't run. I hadn't refused. I had answered back. That was when the walls began to peel. Not all at once. It started in the corners, curling like old wallpaper left to rot. Beneath it, raw wood. Primitive, cracked, almost new. The house was shedding. Peeling away every illusion, every echo, every deception it had used to shape my fear. The mirrors shattered in reverse, silently sealing themselves before melting back into the walls. The desk dissolved into fine dust. The hammer turned to rust in my hand, crumbling between my fingers. And the floor, it began to breathe. One long inhale, one deep, rattling exhale, and then it spoke, not with a voice, with a feeling. The feeling of agreement, permission, release. The door behind me, one I hadn't seen, hadn't heard open, now stood wide. But beyond it wasn't a hallway, not a staircase, not a corridor of memories or a loop of lies. It was a sky. Gray, heavy, unnatural, but open. Infinite in a way the house had never been. I didn't trust it. I shouldn't have. But something deep in me, some fragment untouched by the house's reshaping, whispered that this was different. That what waited beyond the door wasn't a trap. Not yet, anyway. So I stepped through. The light was blinding at first, though not because of brightness. It was the purity of it, the complete absence of decay. The smell of dust and blood was gone. The endless hum of the house's breath no longer haunted the air. I stood on cracked concrete beneath a sky that did not move. There were no clouds, no birds, no wind. Only the whisper of freedom echoing in my skull. But freedom in this place is a dangerous thing, because I wasn't alone. Ahead of me, sprawled across the concrete like discarded mannequins, were others. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all motionless, all breathing, none awake. Their eyes were open, but empty. Their limbs twitched occasionally, but there was no intention in the movement. They weren't hurt. They weren't dead. They were unfinished. I stepped closer to the nearest one, a man maybe in his 30s, his skin gray with dust, a trail of dried blood beneath one nostril. His eyes flicked toward me, but didn't see me. His lips moved, a whisper, barely audible. I leaned down, and what he said chilled me more than anything the house had whispered. Keep building, or it comes back. That was it. No plea for help, no recognition. Just a sentence repeated like prayer. I moved to the next. A girl. Barefoot, fingers stained with ink. Keep building, or it comes back. And another. An old woman, tears dried into the lines of her face. Keep building, or it comes back. It struck me, then, that they weren't victims of the house. They were architects like me. Ones who'd made it this far. Ones who had chosen to design instead of run. But they'd built wrong. They'd built what the house wanted. Rooms of sorrow. Mirrors of punishment. Endless loops of confession and regret. And the moment they fed it fed on them. Not to kill them. To keep them. They had become maintenance. Living batteries. Kept alive just enough to sustain the nightmare. And now that I had built something different, something the house hadn't anticipated, I stood at a crossroads no blueprint could predict. If I stayed here, if I did nothing, the house would return. It would adapt. Find another way to consume what I had made. But if I kept going, if I kept building rooms that broke its pattern, I might change it. Or worse, I might become it. I stepped back from the bodies, looked up at the sky, still gray, still silent. But now, something shimmered at the horizon, a line, a door, floating, impossible, waiting. I knew what it was. The next project. The house was challenging me now, not through terror, through temptation. Keep building, or it comes back. I took a breath, closed my eyes, and stepped toward the shimmer, because I wasn't done yet. Not while the house still whispered. Not while anyone still answered. I didn't walk toward the shimmer. It pulled me. Not physically, not with force, but with memory. Every step forward dredged something old from deep within me. Not just events I'd lived through, but things I'd forgotten on purpose. Little moments scraped from the corners of a haunted childhood, the way the attic door used to swing on its own. How the walls in the basement would sweat in winter. The voice that used to hum lullabies through the floorboards, long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The shimmer wasn't just a threshold. It was a mirror for everything the house had been growing inside me. As I stepped through it, I felt no resistance, just a sudden stillness. And then silence so complete it rang in my ears. The world on the other side wasn't a room. It was a grid, endless, a colorless plane that stretched in every direction, with no sky, no ground, no walls, just floating lines pulsing softly and hanging above me like constellations, blueprints, hundreds of them, all suspended in the air like stars made of parchment and ink. They rotated slowly, softly, casting pale light onto the floorless plane. Each one was labeled. Room 43B, the weeping corridor, room 91F, the child who never stopped falling, room 02A, the closet that cried when opened, and then I saw it. Room X Duro, the architect, my name wasn't on it, but I knew it was mine, because it hadn't been written yet. It hovered, blank, twitching, waiting for me to pick it up, waiting for me to fill it. But the moment I reached toward it, the shimmer around me shifted. A ripple passed through the plane, as though someone had skipped a stone across the surface of thought itself. From behind one of the larger blueprints, a figure emerged. At first I thought it was Elias again, another version, another trick, but no. This one was taller. Older, the face was featureless, as though it had been scrubbed clean with memory. And yet, something about its posture, its breath, the way its head tilted when it looked at me, it was familiar. It spoke, but not in words, in thoughts. You built a door. The air trembled. And you gave it away. I nodded. I didn't need to lie here. There was no point. Do you know what happens when doors are left open too long? I didn't answer. It stepped closer. The house forgets which side it's on. That's when I saw the lines in the air, the grid, the suspended blueprints start to twitch. One by one, rooms began unraveling. Not in destruction, but in memory. They were being forgotten, scrubbed, their names vanishing like chalk in the rain. The house was erasing itself, and it had started with me. Not because I destroyed it, but because I confused it. I broke its rhythm, its cycle. I had fed it lies wrapped in defiance. And now it didn't know which parts were story and which were truth. That was the shimmer's true function: corruption. A misfire. A question mark in a system of periods. The faceless figure stepped aside. Behind it a new door had formed, not like the others. No ornate handle, no cracked frame. Just a hole, floating, pulsing, and from within it I heard my voice, not speaking, screaming. From a time long before the house, from the moment it first saw me, I stepped closer. The figure whispered again, this time in a voice I finally recognized. Mine, not copied, not echoed, not stolen, pure, unchanged. You are not the first builder, and I knew, deep down, I was one of many. A long chain of architects who stumbled upon the house's logic, who chose curiosity over fear, who tried to change it and got eaten. But the shimmer had done something different. It had rewound me. Not in time, in identity. This wasn't just another level of the house. It was the drafting table, the blank page, and I had been brought here not to escape, not to defy, but to finish. Finish the room called the architect. Finish me. The door pulsed harder now, begging to be entered, and I knew stepping through it would not kill me. It would finalize me. The last version. No more variations. No more mirrors. Just one room. Mine. I turned to the faceless figure and asked, finally, what's on the other side? It answered simply, your final question. And I knew, once I stepped through, I could never ask again. But maybe, just maybe, I could be the answer someone else would find. And so, without a goodbye, I stepped through. It felt like nothing at first. No falling, no weight. Just a brief flicker behind my eyes, the way static dances on a dead screen. And then, sound. Not loud, but dense. Like voices buried beneath velvet, speaking in a language no one should ever translate. My limbs were slow to remember themselves, but when they did, I was already somewhere else. No shimmer, no blueprint sky, no grid, just a room. But not just any room. It was my room, the one from childhood. The peeling yellow wallpaper, the warped floorboard near the window that always creaked when stepped on, the bookshelf I once carved initials into and blamed it on the house settling. It was all here. Rebuilt with agonizing precision, Even the air carried that strange mixture of dust and forgotten bedtime tears. But the walls, it was the walls that were wrong. They breathed. Slowly. Gently. And with every inhale, I felt them listening. And then the question came, not from above, not from within, but from around me. A question so quiet it didn't enter my ears, it settled in my spine. Who built the first room? I laughed at first. Short, dry, panicked. Because I didn't know. I had always assumed it was someone else. A nameless horror, some cursed child, a grieving mother, a forgotten ritual. But in the stillness that followed, the room did not offer an answer. It waited. As though it believed I had always known, I moved to the window, expecting the familiar view of the backyard, the old oak tree, the rusted fence. But what I saw instead was me, a younger version. Sitting beneath the tree, staring up at the window I now stood in. Watching me with a face full of confusion and terror, like he could see me from a memory he hadn't lived yet. I blinked. He was gone, replaced by a mirror nailed to the tree. And in that mirror, the younger me was still sitting there, still watching. And then he mouthed it. The same question. Who built the first room? I backed away. The room didn't like that. The wallpaper began to unstick itself. Strips of it slithered down the walls like shedding skin. Beneath it, words. Scratched in small, uneven handwriting. Repeated endlessly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to remember her face. I thought it would help. I thought I could trap the grief. I didn't know it would stay. I didn't know it would build. I spun around. The door was gone. There was no way out, only in. Deeper, wider, through the cracks in the floorboards. A soft red light pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. My own. Or the house's. By now, I wasn't sure there was a difference. I crouched, pried one of the boards loose. Below was darkness, yes, but it wasn't empty. It was written. I saw pages beneath the floor. Hundreds. All made from the same soft parchment I now understood was skin. Each one held a question. Not answers. Not maps. Just more questions. They weren't meant to be read. They were meant to infect. Because the house had never been physical. Not really. It was made of doubt, of inquiry left to rot, and someone, I don't know who, maybe me, maybe all of us, once asked the first wrong question, not to destroy, not to unlock, but to remember, to keep someone alive, to make the pain useful, a monument of grief disguised as shelter. The house was born from mourning too big to fit inside a body, and it grew. Every time someone asked why, every time someone said please, just one more memory. Every time someone looked at death and whispered, come back, I'll build a place for you to stay. This was that place. I stood in the center of the room, trembling. The ceiling peeled away, and I saw her. The original. The girl who had never been a girl. The one who had worn the first mirror face, whispered the first lie, wept the first loop. She floated there. Not beautiful. Not monstrous. Just unfinished. She looked at me with eyes made of question marks. And in her presence, I finally understood. I had built the first room. Or rather, the part of me that broke when I was small, when I lost her, when I wished the world would stop turning just so I could hear her voice one more time. That wish, that's what started it. That wish was the blueprint. And the house was just me, grown large and warped by years of silence. I was the architect. The architect was me, not as punishment, but as legacy. And now I had to choose, keep asking, or become the answer. The girl drifted lower, extending her hand, not to attack, to offer, to welcome me into my own creation. I looked at her, I looked at the room, and then, without speaking, I reached out and took her hand. Her hand was colder than I expected. Not icy, not dead, just absent. Like touching something that had never learned how to feel. There was no pulse, no warmth, no texture, only the weight of memory pressed into flesh. The moment our skin met, the room changed. Not around me, inside me. The walls didn't shake. The ceiling didn't collapse. But I did. I collapsed inward. Everything I thought I was folded in on itself, like a crumpled photograph left too long in the rain. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. Because holding her hand didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity. She wasn't the girl I'd feared, or the ghost I'd chased, or even the sorrow I had tried to understand. She was what was left, the residue of every version of me that had ever loved too hard, mourned too long, begged too quietly. She was my question in human shape, lingering long past the asking. And now, as I held her hand, she finally answered, not in words, in replacement. I felt her slip into my bones like ink through paper. My heartbeat slowed to match hers. My breath sensed with the quiet rise and fall of her chest, and in that moment something awful and inevitable began. I stopped being me. Not in a dramatic, screaming, cinematic kind of way. No, it was gentle, slow, final. Like a clock running out of time. Like an echo fading at last. And in its place, she began to build. It started in my thoughts, foreign ones sliding in beside mine, not pushing them out, but replacing their edges, reshaping their meanings. I thought about my mother and felt nothing but static. I thought about Elias and heard laughter, hers, not mine. I thought about the house and saw blueprints, not trauma. Then my memories began to change, subtly, almost respectfully. In one, I was a boy at a funeral, clutching a wet bouquet. But now I was the one in the casket. In another, I was lost in a mirror maze. But now every reflection waved back with a smile too wide. She was editing me. And I was letting her, because that's what the house had always wanted. Not fear. Not flesh. But contribution. It wanted creators. It wanted believers. It wanted to turn every question into a doorway. And I had built so many. But now I was becoming the room itself. Not trapped. Not haunted. Just repurposed. I looked at my hands. They were no longer trembling. They were no longer mine. The lines on my palms had shifted, new ones forming, like sketches drawn in invisible ink now made visible. A new blueprint. Room 0, the answer, the girl. My girl smiled, not kindly, not crudely, just knowingly. She stepped back, letting go, and where our hands had touched, a door began to form. Not a fake one. Not another trap. A real door. Smooth, wooden, simple. A brass handle. No inscription. I knew what it meant. This was my final creation. One last room. One last question. A place not for me to enter, but for someone else. Someone who would come here, like I did, with grief in their chest and a question on their tongue. And when they opened this door, they wouldn't find a monster. They'd find me. Not as I was, as I had become. A guide, a keeper. A quiet architect. I turned to look at the girl one last time. She was already fading into the walls, her shapes softening, her presence dissolving like salt in warm water. And then she was gone. But her voice remained, tucked in the corners of the new room, humming through the grain of the wood, whispering gently, "Thank you for asking." And then, silence. True silence. I stood before the door I had created, placed my hand on the knob, and waited, because soon someone else would come. And when they did, when they knocked, or cried, or begged to know why the world had broken the way it did, I would be there. Not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as a room, ready to listen. The room did not darken. There was no thunderclap, no sudden drop into nightmare. In fact, everything felt still, suspended, as if time held its breath the moment I touched the door I had built. My fingers rested on the brass knob, neither turning nor retreating. It was warm. Not from the air, not from friction, but from use. Someone had touched this before, or would. The weight of possibility pressed gently against my palm, like the breath of something waiting on the other side. Not a monster. Not a memory. Just presence. A consciousness like a resting eye. I wasn't afraid. That terrified me more than anything else. Because fear had been my compass for so long, a constant hum beneath every heartbeat. And now that it was gone, I felt untethered. The room didn't creak. The floor didn't groan. Even the distant sound of whispering blueprints had faded into a hush too quiet to follow. It was just me and the door. The final door. The one I had made not for escape, not for punishment, but for arrival. And still, I didn't open it. Because I knew what waited wasn't for me. This wasn't my door to walk through. It was someone else's. I had built it, yes. But like any architect, I would never truly live in the thing I created. My role was over the moment the structure stood. The house, my house, was now part of the system. It was complete, balanced in a way none of the other rooms had been. Not a trap, not a question, not a lie. It was a listener, and in the silence, I began to hear it. The footsteps, soft, hesitant. One pair, then two, a child. No, a woman, maybe, a man, possibly. The truth was, I couldn't see them, only feel them. Like the echo of someone trying to remember a dream, they were approaching the door. Not physically. Not yet. But through thought. Through need. They didn't even know they were searching for it. But the house always knew who to invite. And just like that, the brass knob clicked beneath my hand. Not because I turned it. Because someone on the other side did. The door trembled. Not violently. Just enough for the air to shift. For the memory of breath to crawl across the base of my spine. It began to open. Inches at first, then more, and I saw nothing. No person, no face, just space. A soft gray fog rolling outward, slow and steady, like breath into cold air. Shapes formed within it, but not clearly. Half-built thoughts, flickering between presence and void. And then, a voice. Small. Raw. Not crying, but trying not to cry. Is someone there? That question struck like lightning. Because I remembered asking it. Years ago. In the dark. In a mirror. In a hospital room. In a hallway full of things I wasn't old enough to understand. The same voice. My voice. But younger. Lighter. Unfinished. I wanted to speak. To answer. But my tongue was dust. My lips sealed. The room didn't want me to respond. It wanted me to witness. The fog cleared just slightly, enough to reveal the silhouette of a child, barely 10, standing barefoot in an impossible hallway that had no floor. Their eyes darted toward the door, my door, and they hesitated. Their face was drawn tight with confusion, not fear. That would come later. They took one step forward, and the house reacted. The ceiling shifted. Walls materialized around them, forming like ribs around a heartbeat. My room was welcoming them, and in doing so, rewriting itself. The bookshelf I remembered from childhood reappeared. The warped floorboard creaked again. A toy truck appeared in the corner, scratched and rusted with time I didn't remember having. Everything bent subtly toward the new arrival, reshaping to their memories. Because the room wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs now. That was the rule I hadn't understood when I built it. You don't own a door once it opens. You just wait for someone brave enough to walk through it. The child stepped fully inside. And for the first time in all my long silence, I spoke. Not aloud, through the walls. Do you remember? Their heads snapped toward the bookshelf. They looked around, scanning the room for a speaker for a trick. But there was none. Just me. All around them. Do you remember what you were looking for? The child nodded slowly. She used to sing to me. My throat tightened. They stepped to the center of the room. Is she here? I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell them what I had learned, what I had built, what I had become. But the house doesn't allow lies in this room anymore. And so the truth came. She is here, I said. But not the way you expect. The child knelt, and the floor lifted to meet them. From the shadows beneath the warped floorboard came humming. Soft, familiar. A tune too broken to remember fully, yet too important to forget. The child smiled, not widely, not with peace, but with recognition. They weren't healed. They weren't saved, but they were heard. And that, in the house's long history, had never happened before. The fog rolled back in. The walls settled. The door began to close, slowly, gently, finally. And as it did, I stepped back, into the blueprint, into the pulse behind the walls, back into the foundation, where I would wait, not for redemption, not for rescue, but for the next knock. The door closed with no sound, no final click, no fanfare, It simply ceased to be open, like a thought forgotten mid-sentence. The fog behind it curled in on itself, folding memories inward until the air was flat again. The child was gone. Absorbed, embraced, remembered. I could feel them moving now, deep in the house's heart, weaving their grief into the timber and plaster, letting their longing seed itself into the floorboards the same way mine once had. Another story, another blueprint, another echo left in the walls. But I wasn't watching anymore. Not from the room, not from the doorway. I was in a place beneath even that. A room with no shape, no walls, no gravity, just breath and memory stitched together like nerves in a brain that remembered too much. This was the place they didn't tell you about. The room between names. Where the architects go when their blueprints have been read, when their whispers fade, when the house no longer needs to wear their voices. A place that shouldn't exist, but always has. I wasn't alone here. I felt them. Others. The first ones. The original questions. Their presence pressed in around me, not in bodies, but in intent. They had names once, maybe. Or maybe the house stripped them on entry, leaving only the ache behind. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because in this place, everything is felt. And what I felt was this: they were waiting. Not for freedom. Not for revenge. But for the next version. The next architect. The next voice to slip between a question and a scream. Because this was the cycle. Not the ghosts. Not the house. This. This endless waiting in the folds between reality, hoping someone, anyone, would come along and make the room different. I had tried. I had changed something. But even I wasn't sure if I'd changed it enough. So I asked the room, the in, between, the nameless foundation holding all of us here, a final question. What was her name? Because she, the girl, the whisperer, the reflection, had always been the thread running through every version. She had guided me, broken me, rebuilt me. She had shown me every corner of the house and still kept secrets tucked under the floor. And now, in the silence, the room answered. Not with a voice, with a memory. A woman sitting in a chair, humming, sewing a small, red dress, her eyes hollow with something deeper than sorrow, but her hands steady. A mirror across from her, cracked in one corner. A child's drawing on the wall, scribbled in crayon, and written in the corner for Anna. Anna. The name settled over everything like ash. Anna wasn't the ghost. She wasn't the girl. She was the origin. The grief that built the first room. The mother who couldn't bury her daughter. So she remembered her. Again and again and again. Until the memory needed walls. And those walls needed visitors. Anna built the first version of the house not to haunt anyone, but to never be alone. That was the horror. That was the seed. The house wasn't malevolent by design. It was lonely. And in its loneliness, it turned every knock at the door into an invitation. Every lost soul into a blueprint. Every memory into construction material. I sank deeper into the room between names. And finally, I understood. I wasn't here to be punished. I wasn't here to rest. I was here to keep remembering. To hold Anna's name in the quiet. To hold all their names. Because names are how the house survives. And forgetting, true forgetting, is the only thing that could destroy it. But none of us would let that happen. Not yet. So we waited, and waited, until another knock. Another grief, another child who couldn't sleep. And then the house would begin again. And we, those between names, would build. There is something terrifying about permanence. Not the kind etched into stone or bound in pages, but the kind you feel behind your eyes when the world has forgotten you, yet you still remain. That was the truth of the room between names. We weren't dead. We weren't even ghosts. We were functions now. Echoes with agency. Eyes without lashes, mouths without sound, eternally pressed against the fabric of the house, watching it breathe, twitch, and grow. No calendar marked the time here. No light fell or rose. But we knew when the world outside changed. We felt it in the bones of the house, in the creaking of door frames that didn't belong to us, in the sharp cries of new arrivals who hadn't yet learned how to whisper. Anna's name echoed constantly, like a heartbeat in a place without blood. Her sorrow was our floor, her love was our ceiling, and her refusal to forget, that was the air we breathed. And still, she never spoke. Not once. Her memory floated among us, complete in silence, never begging to be remembered, because she had already won. Her grief had achieved architecture. That was the part no one outside the house ever understood. Grief doesn't ask permission. It builds. Even when you try to ignore it, even when you think you've moved on, it lays the foundation for places you'll return to without knowing why. A certain scent. A melody. A hallway in a dream. The house was made from those materials, soft, inescapable, and now it was changing again. We felt it ripple through the walls a new breach. Not just a knock, not just another visitor. This was different. This was someone who didn't arrive through grief or guilt or longing. This was someone who came looking for answers. We recoiled. Not from fear, but caution. The house wasn't meant for people like that. It welcomed the broken, the desperate, the sleepwalkers of memory. But this was a hunter. Someone trying to trace the origin of nightmares like a map, and the house didn't know what to do with them. The walls tightened, the staircases retracted, doors opened into themselves, and mirrors blinked shut like scared eyes. The visitor moved deeper anyway. We couldn't see them, yet, but we could feel their questions scraping against the design. Not whispers, demands. They wanted to know who built the first room. They wanted to know how to end it. And that question, it burned. It seared its way into the foundation like fire through threadbare cloth. We tried to slow them. We rewrote halls mid-step. We doubled corridors and reversed gravity, but they adapted too quickly. They didn't feel the house. They analyzed it. Every echo became a breadcrumb. Every flicker of a shadow, a clue. And the worst part, they didn't carry fear. They carried logic. And logic, in a place built from grief, is the sharpest weapon imaginable. But they made one mistake. They entered my room, the door I built, the one made for the child who only wanted to be heard. They stepped into that space, expecting data, expecting traps. What they found instead was a chair, a toy truck, a red thread hanging from the ceiling like a noose left by a ghost with second thoughts. And me, not in form, not in voice, in presence. I did not attack them. I simply asked, without words, "Why are you here?" And for the first time since they arrived, the hunter hesitated. Their breath hitched. They looked around, almost confused. "I need to know," they whispered aloud, as if it made it more true. Why does the house keep growing? It was the right question. The real question. And I wanted, so badly, to tell them the truth. That it grows because it has to. Because every time someone loses something they can't bury, the walls rise a little higher. Because every child who hears their name whispered from a closet becomes a new cornerstone. Because every parent who can't forget the sound of a door closing at 3:17 a.m. is a brick in the spine of the attic. But most of all, because some people, like Anna, simply refuse to let the dead stay dead. So instead of telling them, I showed them. I let them see the truth, the blood-stained origin, the blueprint etched into Anna's wrists, the lullaby she sang until her throat cracked, the moment she whispered her daughter's name into the mirror and asked, "What if I just make a place for her to stay?" And the mirror, oh, that damned mirror, answered. It said yes, and the house was born. The hunter dropped to their knees. Not from pain, from understanding. The logic had failed, because the truth was too human, too soft, too real, and real things rot faster than nightmares. I drifted closer, not to comfort, but to mark them. They would not die here. They would not be consumed. They would be changed. As I had been, their questions would stop. Their answers would blur. Their hands would tremble the next time they held a pencil or typed a sentence. Because now they knew the house doesn't end. It doesn't burn. It doesn't fade. It remembers. And one day, when they've forgotten the hallway they stepped through, or the red thread that wrapped around their wrist, or the name they once said aloud just to hear it echo, they'll feel a draft behind a closet door. They'll hear humming where no one sings. They'll wake up with blueprints drawn on the inside of their eyelids. And they'll know they've begun to build. There is no ending. Not really. Just the moment where someone stops looking behind them. The house knows this. It has always known. It waits, not patiently, not hungrily, but with certainty. Because grief isn't a question that needs answering. It's a door that opens inward. And once opened, the house waits for you to step inside. You. The one reading this. Listening. Wondering how the story ends. You've felt it, haven't you? That low pull in your chest when you walk past a room you never use. That moment just before sleep when you swear someone is standing just outside your periphery, watching with breath that doesn't rise or fall. The way mirrors sometimes show you not just yourself, but something slightly off. A delay in the blink, a twitch at the corner of the mouth, a reflection that seems to want to stay even after you've walked away. You've heard the creak on the stairs, even when no one's home. You found doors open that you swear you shut. And maybe, just maybe, you've caught a melody, faint and aching, humming through the walls in a key you can't quite place. A song you never learned, but somehow remember. That's not imagination. That's invitation. Because once you've heard the house, even once, it knows your name. And it doesn't forget. You don't need to lose someone to build your first room. You just have to want them back. Even for a second. Even in a whisper. Even if you never say it aloud. The house hears intention louder than screams. That's how it starts. Not with a bang. Not with a tragedy. With a thought. A question that comes late at night, when you're too tired to guard your mind. What if I just built a space for them to come back to? You think it's innocent. You think it's love. But the house has no morality. It doesn't care if you're good. It doesn't care if you're broken. It only cares that you remember, and so you build. Sometimes it's a drawer full of photos you never throw away. Sometimes it's an old voicemail you listen to until the voice starts sounding wrong. Sometimes it's a locked room you never enter again, but can't bring yourself to empty. The house forms in these gaps, in the walls between denial and remembrance. And when it's ready, it speaks, not in language, not even in dreams, in patterns. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Water stains that shift each time you blink. A spot on the ceiling that seems to grow whenever you remember their name. And you will try to explain it away. Until you can't. Until the blueprint draws itself in your mind and the hammer is already in your hand. Until the first nail sinks without resistance. Until the walls start to hum. You will build. Not because you want to, because you need to. And when the house is ready, when the last brick is laid in grief, the last room sealed in memory, you'll hear the knock. 3 times. Always 3. Slow. Even. Personal. You'll feel it in your teeth. Behind your eyes. It will not demand. It will ask. Are you ready to remember? And the moment you say yes, even silently, you'll open the door. It won't look like anything at first. Just a hallway. Just a room. But you'll feel it. The shift. The tilt of reality. Time will ripple. Mirrors will hold onto your reflection a second too long. And then you'll hear her. Not Anna. Not the girl. Not the architect. Your version. The one the house crafted just for you. She'll speak with a voice pulled from your oldest memory of loss. She will sound familiar. And she will say, welcome. We've been waiting. The door will close behind you. Not to trap. Not to punish. To begin. And maybe you'll resist. At first. But eventually, you'll do what we all did. You'll start sketching. You'll start measuring the distance between pain and peace. You'll build. You'll try to make a room that doesn't hurt. A room that doesn't scream. A room that lets someone else go without losing them forever. And maybe, Just maybe you'll succeed. Maybe you'll make your room. The one that listens. The one that holds. The one that remembers without breaking. But even if you don't, even if the house uses you up like it did to us, know this will be here. In the walls. In the silence. In the mirror. We will know your name. And we will say it softly. Until the next builder comes. Until the next door opens. Until the house grows again. Because this was never a horror story. This was a blueprint. And you were always going to be part of it. Welcome home,